council workshop for Monday, November 14th at 7 o'clock. Council, there's been an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? There are none. Will someone please move adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Murray, second by Councillor Back. Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded, motion carries. Council, there's several sets of minutes that have been circulated with the agenda package. May 16th, June 13th, July 11th, and July 19th.
So moved.
Any errors or omissions from those 80 minutes as presented? Hearing none. Moved by Councillor Murray, second by Councillor Forbes. Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded, motion carries. So tonight is a very important orientation session. This is making sure that we all understand both the breadth and scope of district operations, but also what the different departments are working on right now, what they've done over the last sort of year, and what they have coming up in the work plan for the year, and some of the challenges that we're facing to address shortages in staff and other budgetary constraints. But at this time, Mr. Stewart, do you have any opening comments that you'd like to make?
Your worship, so the intent is to go through I call it the internal departments, which are the folks that report to me. We've been talking to the external partners, which is the rec and the police and museum and archives, et cetera, and they've expressed a preference, at least with the new councillors, of doing something directly with them. The rest of you are all quite familiar with those partnerships, and many of you actually served on their boards. So we're going to focus next on the 28th after we have the lawyer in, Don Lidstone. We're going to focus on a sort of a little more of a, I don't know, an informal discussion about, some of the things that run for council and some of the things that we're particularly interested in. And I'm not talking about getting into the big strategic stuff, like, we're going to have a third crossing or not. We'll be doing that, starting that discussion on the 12th. But the 28th would just be an opportunity just to get to know each other a little bit better. And just start to talk about some of the smaller stuff that you'd like to see, so that we can, as staff, kind of configure that and make sure we get into our work plans. But maybe I'd like to start by maybe asking the staff to introduce themselves. I think they know who you are, but you might not know who they are. So I'll start over with Carolyn. We'll just go around the board.
I'm Carolyn Grafton, Manager for Strategic Communications.
I'm Peter Cohen. I'm the Deputy General Manager of Engineering Services. Dan Milburn, General Manager of Planning and Properties and Permits.
Wayne Kennedy, I'm the Deputy Fire Chief for your district fire department.
Deputy General Manager of Engineering Operations.
Sure.
Deputy Glenn, Deputy Municipal Clerk. Maria Manasso, Policy Analyst, Corporate Services.
Andrew Durden, I'm the Director of Digital Services and IT. Wardell, Director of Finance, Digital.
And I'm Deputy General Manager of Finance and Deputy Digital.
Caroline Jackson, Director of Climate Action Systems.
Now repeat that.
So for the most part, you'll be getting a package with numbers and names and all of that if you haven't got that already, because these are the people you're mostly going to be talking to, rather than necessarily go into the bowels of the organization. And you'll see from part of my presentation, some of you have more experience in the district than a lot of our staff at this particular point. So that's just a little bit of the lay of land. And with that, I'm going to jump into corporate services. You met Syra last week, and she's on holidays right now, but I'll just give you a quick overview of corporate services. After each of the presentations, there'll be an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have, and then we'll just move on to the next in order. So if I could have the next slide, please. So corporate services, as in a lot of municipalities, is the grab bag of departments. All the stuff that doesn't quite fit in, or for some various reasons, in a lot of cases, it serves the whole organization as opposed to one particular function. So corporate services does corporate planning, deals with a lot of the intergovernmental relationships, and we're talking different levels of government. Human resources and labor relations are in their bailiwick. Communications, and Carolyn's going to talk a little bit about communications. Administrative services, which is essentially a fancy word for the clerk's department. That includes the front office out front, Legal services, and I'm not going to talk a lot about legal services because when Dawn comes on the 28th, that'll be an opportunity to have our internal lawyer here, and then we can talk about, in particular, how you access legal services. And corporate services actually is also responsible for our Indigenous relationships. And we've been doing a lot of work in the last little while on that. And just because we don't know where else to put it, filming also falls under corporate services. Maybe that's just a rendition of the structure. It's a pretty flat structure. $5 million operating budget, really no capital, and about 33 FTEs spread through the different functions that I've just mentioned. Next slide. So I mentioned demographics earlier on, and we have seen a real shift in the district over the last 5 to 10 years, and we now have 87% of our workforce is either Gen X or baby boomers. So that older group, the millennium or the traditional, we call them, very few left in the organization right now. And we're going to continue to see that trend. And as I'll mention in a minute, one of the concerns we've got is the knowledge loss when you have that significant of a turnover and the kinds of vacancies that we've got right now. This gender demographics, it doesn't quite maybe break down as much as I would like. You could see that in our exempt, which is our non-union staff. We've almost got parity there in terms of women and men. If we looked at CUPE, you would see, in fact, we probably got parity with the inside group, that's the municipal hall group, and you would see a shift, much like fire, with more men in the operations area, and as I say, fire is the same kind of arrangement. Maybe we could move to the next slide. So something that I'm not going to talk about all of these, but in particular, council was interested in some of the social movements, I'll say, during the last term, in particular, inclusivity, diversity, anti-discrimination, and particularly about truth and reconciliation. So they directed us to start down that path. As I mentioned, we've done quite a bit of work, particularly on policy work, but also training work to get us up to speed as an organization, and doing a lot of training. We're going to continue that work, and we'll probably have a special workshop early next year just to give you a better flavor of what that involves. We certainly have done a lot of work with the Tsleil-Waututh to strengthen our relationship. If you don't know, we have a joint agreement to manage Kate's wage in the last couple of years. We've updated the service agreement that we have for IR3. This is whereby we, for the most part, provide the services that they need to actually function on the reserve. They've got their own issues and interests, and they certainly have a staff of their own, but we basically provide essential municipal services, and we recover funds for them every year. For that, we also have agreements on things like this. Okay. I can't speak too much about the addition to reserve because that's still under embargo, but I will do that in an in-camera meeting in the future. We have been in discussions with the Tsleil-Waututh and the federal government on that. But I can't speak too much about that because it's still embargoed, and there's some things that they have to do as well. We do, however, we've renegotiated a new protocol agreement, which explains how those parties work with one another, and we can again in a workshop go over that in a little more detail. And as you'll see, one of the things that we're going to be looking at as we head into 2023 is this whole issue of heritage and referral. And I say that most Indigenous groups have areas that they're particularly sensitive about. There's some Heritage Act legislation that requires us to be sensitive to those in terms of what we do. And so what we're going to be looking at as we head into 2023 is what kind of projects are they interested in? Where are these areas that they're particularly interested in? So we don't end up with a situation where we have a crew arrive at a site and it's a sensitive site. And all of a sudden we got to drop tools, we got to get permits, we got to start a whole consultation process. Sometimes that could take half a year. So it's a really sensitive project. It's better to have at the very beginning of the year an understanding as to what's important for them to be involved in. And you'll hear probably more from Andy about this, but certainly we have prioritized digitization in terms of our customer service. We're going to be continuing to do that as we move forward. We're making some great strides in that. So I'll just turn to major projects and initiatives. Corporate plan, that's our kind of our business plan that sets out the 4-year, this is what we need to do. We're doing a general review of our policies, and we hope to update many of them. We've got, how many thousands of policies do we have, Jim?
Several dozen.
Yeah.
From thousands to several dozen. There's something in between.
We're working, you'll see a few spruced up and consolidated ones shortly.
We have even had bylaws and policies, of course.
Yeah.
Support that. Those are policies, you talk about bylaws, we have 8,000 of
Oh, yeah, there's the 1,000 number. There we go.
As I mentioned, we're going to be advancing projects and initiatives. We're trying to put together to get a dinner with the band council and the district council. We're going to try to do it for December if we can, and if not, it will be January. We'll do when we go on to sign up. We are looking at a tri-municipal and district relations task force where we have the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, West Vancouver, the city of North Vancouver, the district of North Vancouver, all at the table. Because otherwise what happens is we're all dealing with things differently and it gets confusing for everybody. So we're really hopeful that will work out. We've got collective bargaining with CUPE and fire. We haven't had a strike in years. Fire goes under a different kind of a set of regulations in the sense that they can't go on strike, so they go to arbitration. But we've started discussions with CUPE, and I think at this point the only thing I would say is that everybody kind of look at what the pattern is that's unfolding in the region, and it's likely that's what we're going to end up with at some point in 2023. We know that a number of you have talked about community engagement and how important that is, and so we'll be looking at the ways that we engage the community now and talk about maybe some ways that you think we could do that better. And then I'll just talk about organization, culture, and values. We did a lot of work, and previous councils were involved with all of our staff in the organization to try to find out what was important in terms of how the organization works on a formal basis. We achieved a consensus, and interestingly enough, we've been doing some surveys this year, and both the exempt and the staff, and particularly the new staff, really feel that this whole issue of organizational culture and values is really important as a lens to look at decisions. So again, we'll be doing some work on that. If I can have the next, the issues and challenges, I won't go into a lot on organizational resiliency other than we've identified as a real issues. The number of vacancies that we've got, and that's right across the region. That's not just the district of North Vancouver. The private sector is experiencing, I mean, it's actually a North American problem, it's not a worldwide problem. So there's a lot of stuff that comes with that. And so we're going to try to unpack that this year and see where, in fact, we can make some changes or make some adaptation. I mentioned engagement projects with the First Nations, and I mentioned the review of the legal department. So I'm going to turn over to Carolyn just to talk for a minute, and then we can open up to questions.
Good, Carolyn.
So just to give you a quick overview of the Communications Department, I'm going to stand over here if that's okay, because the Councillor so we're a service organization. We're part of corporate services. So as the other presentations unfold, you'll see them talk about their projects, and communications is involved in a lot of the projects that happen throughout the district. But these are the 4 main areas that I tend to break our work into. So internal communications is all about supporting that organizational resilience, building an engaged workforce, letting them know what's going on in the organization, drawing them back to the idea of the culture and our corporate priorities. So we spend lots of work there. We support the change management efforts. You folks have access to what we call the DJ, which is short for District Junction, our intranet. And so you'll see a lot of the stuff that we do up on that. Up on the DJ, as we fondly call it. The second area is external communications, which is a grab bag for social media, all the work that we do on social media, the work that we do with media as well, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that at the end, and then also our efforts to share with the community the good things that the district is doing, because there's a lot of them. So we're going into our second year of our storytelling strategy. We tell long form stories. You'll see those shared on social media, on our website, and also on the DJ. And we tell everything from, the fleets that the new trucks and things that fire might have going on, or, a new way of dealing with the climate that we haven't dealt with before. We share stories on that sort of thing. And then we also tell what I call micro stories. So those are little things that are going on in the district that is more about the nuts and bolts. So we'll, go out and take shots of a curb machine extruding the actual shape of the curb and share, because everybody's like, that's cool, I didn't know that was a thing, right? So we talk about that, or flail machines, or how we clear catch basins, all that kind of stuff, just to give people a little bit of insight into what the district is doing. And then all of that is shared on social media. We're primarily on Facebook and Twitter. We're increasingly on Instagram, especially as our residents people are there. Social media has pros and cons. We know that. So we deal with the tools that we're given, and but it is a place where the residents do expect to hear from us and where they look to us as an information source. And so what we also started doing that I thought you folks might be particularly interested in is that in September of this year, we started promoting council meetings in a different way on social media than we did before. So we changed up the graphics, and we'll continue to do that because we want to make sure that people recognize it and it grabs their attention and that sort of thing. We talk about meetings before they happen, to tell people what you're going to talk about. And then we talk about them the day of, just to remind them. But then when the meeting is over, we do a very, very, very short social media video, literally 8 seconds, maybe as far as 11 seconds, but no longer than that. People don't have the patience to watch something longer than that. And it just gives them that very top of the waves skim of what happened at the council meeting. Those have proven to be quite popular. People then have the option to click and go deeper and read more information, but it just gives them that bird's eye view. And for a lot of residents, that's what they're looking for, just that surface understanding of what's happening. And then they will dive deeper when they want to, or there's a topic that appeals to them.
Frightening, we can only sit for 10 seconds.
11.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, that's better.
I'm stretching it. Say. The third bucket, as sorry, Maria, if you just go back quickly. The third bucket is when we engage with the community. So it was quite a record-setting year for us this year when we engaged with the community. We had 9 engagements over the course of the year so far, which is a lot of those broad, deep engagements. We got back to doing some in-person events as well, which members of the community also liked. We do engagements on anything from, dealing with parks or with active transportation. And then the last bucket that we deal with is what I call visual identity, but it's the logo, it's the colors, it's the graphics, that sort of thing. This year we put a lot of attention into building our photo library and building ourselves a really recognizable graphic presence, because we know that people scroll, right? When you're on your phone, you're just like casually going through quickly. We wanted to build an identity that people would recognize right away. Oh, that's the DNB, and they would stop and then read a little bit more information. So that was a big focus for us in the last year. So Maria, if you can go to the next slide, please. Just a quick perspective on where you can expect to be interacting with communications. So other than occasionally at council meetings, we will get updates from us. So you've probably already seen that we send media reports at the end of the week. And that talks about, interview requests that we had or stories that covered the district to varying degrees. You will also get what we call snow command updates. So when the snow flies, you will hear from us a lot. And we're giving you, many departments are part of Snow Command. We are the face that you will see the most. And it's our information that we give you about the status of the roads, the sidewalks, the transit stops in the DNB in an effort to keep the district moving, really. The more it snows, the more you'll hear from us. We also post that on social media, but I think you can expect that people will be asking you directly. And then issue notes. So you've gotten some of those from me already. So when a major issue happens in the district, you can expect that communications will send you an issue note. The information in that note will contain points that you can share with the public. When it's confidential, we'll make it very clear to you that it's confidential. So usually there will be a summary of what's going on, and then there will be a few bullet points of key information. Unless it says confidential, that information can be shared. Okay. And then when it comes to the media, so communications is the front space between the district and the media. So we take media inquiries both for the district in general and then also for the mayor if they want to speak directly with him. Staff will be the spokespeople when there's factual information that they're looking for about a project or about an event. Bigger issues and events generally require the mayor's voice as the spokesperson of the organization. So that will be from a leadership perspective, or when there's bigger events going on, partner events going on, things like that. You may get media requests reaching out to you directly. So comments from councillors is essentially you offering a perspective as an elected official representing the views of your constituents. The acting mayor, we will take those calls, we'll coordinate the interview for you, and in those cases you will be speaking as the voice of the organization. So it'll be a little bit different, and we can pull you up through all of that. We do ask that if you talk to a member of the media, that you do let us know. They'll be able to track who you've talked to. It's just a simple, hey, Carolyn, I talked to this media outlet at this time about this topic. And then we also have media monitoring in place, so we can find the clip, the interview that you did. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, if you do get a request from media to talk to them, I just strongly suggest you give Carolyn a call and say, what's this about? You know, you may have a perspective, we may have additional information, and that way, if you choose to talk to the media, you got the whole picture, as opposed to what your neighbors maybe told you.
To be clear, you don't have to talk to the media. However, if you feel comfortable addressing the issue, it even then makes a lot of sense to just say, can I call you back in 5 minutes? And just check in to make sure that, you know, it's always more powerful when you can say, I've been briefed on a subject, or, you know, there's very few media deadlines that need to take place within that 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so even if you just say, can I call you back in 5 minutes? Then, you know, you make sure that you're on.
Yeah, that's very good.
And there's lots of other tips that Carolyn can give you on media if you want to sit down and have a 10-minute. I always love the pregnant pause. They're not happy with the answer, so they just keep the microphone in your face until the tension goes up, that you break the tension. But there's lots of tips. It's nerve-wracking when you go into some of these interviews, and Carolyn can give you lots of great tips.
And if you see a member of the media calling you and you're not expecting it, you also do not have to answer. You can let it go to voicemail, access the message. They'll tell you what it is that they're calling about, and they'll usually also tell you the deadline. And then you can call and we can support you. Obviously, that goes for everybody here, but you've also heard that before.
And Carolyn and her staff can also tell you which reporter's already written the story. And they're just looking to catch you on something, and which ones are honestly trying to find out more information so they can write a story. And we found some of them, you know, I have them into my office once in a while. We'll give them briefing notes, and it really helps them write a story, as opposed to, you know, they just heard this and this is where they want to hone in on, and they don't understand the big picture.
The media landscape is changing, and it has changed a lot. And over the pandemic, we did see the number of media inquiries go down. Part of that is based on resources. They were following the pandemic, and it was certainly demanded a lot of resources from people. The media landscape in general is changing. The outlets have amalgamated. There's fewer people that are out that are in that industry. And then also organizations have the ability to tell the message themselves. We can tell our stories ourselves. We're not relying on the media to the same degree that we were before. So it has changed, but it's what we do. So use us as experts because we're happy to help.
Great. Are there any questions around corporate services or communications? Mike, do you have your phone number handy?
I have a question regarding the demographics. Pleased to see that there's a fairly gender balanced staff. Wondering why you have nothing on diversity.
I just couldn't pull that information, but I've asked for that information. So I'll share that with you as well. Very interesting. We had a meeting of all of the exempt established. The first time we had it in 5 years, earlier this year. And it was quite an experience because, again, where 10 years or 15 years ago, it was just, to be quite honest, you know, one shade of white to a large degree, and that's really changed in the organization. So I look forward to getting that information from HR and then sharing that with you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to climate and biodiversity, just as a way of an introduction. That was Carolyn, this is Caroline. Start to get used to all this. But again, one of the directions that council gave us in this last term was really to be much more proactive with respect to climate change, adaptation, mitigation, that kind of thing. And so we've actually created a department that's specifically responsible, although they work with all the departments to move initiatives forward. So I'll just turn it over to Caroline to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's true. I think a lot of people choose to live in the district because they're so close to nature. And indeed, I think the district has quite a long history of being a leader in environmental sustainability. And so in 2019, the district declared a climate and ecological emergency and called for transformative change. And then subsequently, this new climate and biodiversity team was established. And really, our role is to coordinate and lead that work. And as David mentioned, there's really kind of two aspects to that work. And one is really working across the organization, working with key staff in the various different departments here at the district. And the other one is working more broadly with communities, whether it's business groups, community groups, schools, etc. We're really working to work with external partners. Sometimes it's our neighboring municipalities trying to align our policies and our programs as much as possible. Next slide. So there's really three main goals to this work. The first is reducing emissions as a corporation and as a community. And our target is a 45% target below 2007 levels by the year 2030, and of course zero emissions by 2050. The second goal is really around ecosystem health and our natural systems, and really protecting and enhancing biodiversity of all those natural areas that we hold so dear. And then finally, improving our community's resilience to climate change. We're already experiencing, as we all know, from the heat dome event and the significant rain events and windstorms that we're having, that change is accelerating. And so really, this final goal is really around strengthening our resilience, whether it's our built infrastructure or in some ways our community social infrastructure. Next slide. And so there's really 6 main pathways that we're working towards these goals through. So the first one is demonstrating leadership in terms of our operations and our assets. The second is low carbon buildings and low carbon, and the third is low carbon transportation. So low carbon buildings, low carbon new buildings, as well as existing buildings for retrofits. Low carbon transportation is really about supporting a shift from gas powered vehicles to electric vehicles, and also towards active transportation. And really the way we do that is through putting the infrastructure in place to support the changes. Zero waste is all about reducing the amount of waste that we're sending to landfill and shifting to a more circular economy. Healthy ecosystems, as I mentioned, protecting and enhancing health. And then finally, strengthening our climate resilience, whether that's upsizing our storm mains, natural hazard management, and some of the work that North Shore Emergency Management does around extreme heat response planning. And this work is really guided by 3 main plans. There's our community energy and emissions plan. And that was adopted in 2019. There's the 2017 climate adaptation plan and a biodiversity strategy, which is currently in development. And of course, there's our overarching OCP action plan, which was adopted by Council in 2021. And while these are the main 6 pathways, there's also another element to this work, and that's the climate lens, which is referred to in our OCP action plan. And what that's about is really embedding climate action into our policies and programs, so kind of making it part of the way we do business. Next slide. So this is intentionally a fairly lean team that focuses on collaborating across the organization. So the intention is not to create another standalone department, but to advance this work collaboratively through internal and external partnerships. So we have a corporate leadership team that works with our facilities, fleet, and operations teams to reduce emissions and increase climate resilience. We have a sustainability planning and projects group, which is focused on policy and program development. And that group also supports monitoring outcomes and reporting out on progress. towards achieving our goals. And then finally, a biodiversity resource focused on advancing biodiversity strategy. Next slide.
I did just want to interject, we're having a lot of slides and numbers come up, so I just wanted to clarify. We're going to send this package around, so don't worry about getting all the fine print on everything. You will have this sent around.
Yeah, thank you. And I should have mentioned, actually, though, the information around the 6 key directions is all on our website, and there's links to all of the different initiatives and programs and all the areas that we cover and how we support this directions. Next slide. And then just a few current initiatives that I want to highlight. So, of course, implementing changes to our buildings and fleet and support leadership to reduce emissions in our operations. New building policies. So we have adopted step regulations to reduce emissions in new construction. And then, of course, we partnered with the City of North Vancouver and the District of West Vancouver in the Jump on Heat Pump program, which is all about supporting residents who are doing retrofits at home so that they have the information and the incentives available. We're supporting the transition to electric vehicles through building up charging infrastructure, particularly at our facilities. We're not as worried so much about folks that are living at home that can easily put in a charger if they're in a single family home, but folks that are in existing multifamily buildings, they face more barriers to charging. So we want to get those chargers out into those key locations in the community to support them.
Just as an interesting little tidbit, we actually are going to be piloting an electric garbage truck. I think we're probably one. Oh, I know we're one of the first in Canada, if not in North America.
Up the 29th Street Hill, right?
Well, that's the issue is how do
Just to get it up the
these
hill.
battery operated big heavy vehicles work, you know?
And then we'll go to fire.
Torque is no problem. It's charge.
And then in terms of deconstruction, so we just recently, we have a new deconstruction bylaw to salvage wood from older homes that are built before the year 1950. And then we're developing a new biodiversity strategy, as I mentioned. And then in terms of climate adaptation, this has really been kind of clear in this area. Of course, we have our wildfire protection plan, the North Shore Sea Level Rise strategy, which was developed with the city and West Vancouver's climate change report. Extreme heat response planning that our emergency office does. And then, of course, we just in the process of kind of going through implementation of the 2017 climate adaptation plan and looking at kind of what went well and where some of the gaps are. So stay tuned for some of that work.
We have done a lot of work on stormwater management in particular because of concerns about flooding and debris flow. A lot of work to analyze the entire district as to where the risks are, and we've done a lot of adaptation over the last 5 years, spent tens of millions of dollars to make the community safe.
And so just your recent highlights, so the community energy and emissions plan was adopted by Council in 2019, and we recently received an award for the execution of that plan. We also got an award from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. The low carbon step code and the climate ready zoning policy, these two policies taken together are ensuring that our new construction does not emit emissions and is also resilient to future changes. So we now, for larger projects, we do expect to see cooling in all of those projects, both in rental and strategies. Our municipal hall retrofit recently achieved a 50% reduction in emissions, which is really quite standard in terms of retrofits. We've been participating in kind of trying to make energy visible and really being upfront about the energy that our facilities use and the emissions that we're creating through our facilities. And so we mapped that. We participated in an initiative to map that and to disclose it online. We recently received an award for that work. Demolition waste as I think already, and of course the North Shore Sea Level Rise strategy. We, along with our partners, recently work for that work.
We started to do energy retrofits about, I would say, 10 years ago. And just again, for your information, the big energy users are recreation centers. The operations center and all of that's where we do a lot of work, seeing the way that we can change the way we actually deliver those services and reduce the energy emissions resulting.
So issues and challenges. So I talked a little bit about the climate lens from the OCP action plan, and there was actually another implementing lens. And apologies, Dan, if I'm going to go into some of the areas that you're going to talk about, but another one of those lenses is really the equity lens. The climate and equity lens together are two lenses that we really want to be using when we're making our investment decisions and our policy decisions. This work is really collaborative and very interdisciplinary, so it requires kind of getting different disciplines together in a room and people understanding each other's languages and figuring out together what the solution is to whatever the problem is. And then David touched a bit on workforce transition and just how we need to support as our staff. We have new staff and we have staff moving into new positions as well. We want to make sure that we support them with the knowledge and the tools that they need in order to advance a lot of this work. One of the challenges, especially with the climate resilience work, is that tension between planning for these short-term acute events like heat domes or windstorms versus some of those longer-term, more gradual changes like sea level rise. And really both are important. And so it's kind of finding a balance between those two areas of focus. And then finally, another area where we want to achieve some balance is between some of the leadership in terms of corporate operations and then advancing programs as well.
You probably appreciate, I mean, the bigger move that we can make is a community move as opposed to just. Sure, we're 1,000 employees and we can do all kinds of things corporately, but if you really want to move dial, that would be as a result of engaging our community.
And then just finally, just a few highlights here on this last slide. So our operations team has really highlighted a lot of work in terms of working with asphalt. And we're now actually doing all of our major projects in Alberta and to reduce significant energy reductions and emission reductions. They've also shared a lot of their expertise with other municipalities, so we're starting to see that spread beyond the borders. The Jump on People program has been quite popular, I would say, with residents from the 3 municipalities. We've had webinars with hundreds of residents participating and learning about kind of the process and asking questions about, what's involved and being able to support them with that work. And so that's the website for folks. And we also have a virtual home checkup where you can get a phone call from an advisor and get a little bit of help with your plan. And finally, the Urban Tree Camp project, which is an initiative of our environment team. And really, this is the second year that we've run this program, and we've doubled this year the number of plants that residents are now planting in their backyards to grow the urban tree canopy. So it's been really quite a successful initiative. And just this year, we've also launched a new sustainability grants programs for community organizations and organizations that have interest from groups and how we can kind of support some of the action. That's it. Questions?
I have a question about, I'm just curious if you know the numbers of how many people have heat pumps in the district or
Yes.
on the shore.
It's in the hundreds now, and it was really initially when we first started this work back a couple of years ago as a tri-municipal group. There were very, very few, sort of just probably a dozen or so, and really it's been quite a transformation. There were only maybe 1 contractor available who was certified, and now there's 10. So it's kind of that market transformation that we're kind of seeing. And then of course you get the benefit of the cooling, which I think people really appreciate in the summer.
Yeah, so lots of room for expansion there.
Yeah.
Still only hundreds? So I'm sorry, it was still only hundreds though, across the North Shore. Wow, that's surprising.
Well, honestly, and what it is the market is just now catching up and starting to accelerate. So really that initial stage of transformation. So it's good. It's gonna keep going.
For a single family home after the grants, what's probably the net cost of going to a heat pump?
Oh, it's so variable. It'd be hard. I wouldn't want to give a number.
I'm going to say 8,000 to 15,000.
It's a lot. Well, my father lived in a new unit out by UBC, and he bought it brand new, 1,200 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And the heat pump that was put into that unit, he was on the 6th floor, lasted 10 years and needed to be replaced after that 10 years at a cost of $10,000 for an apartment. So I was quite surprised by that, but it was put in, it was put in 10 years ago. So it was again new, right? So how is the industry changing? How will the
Hugely
cost come
changed.
down?
There's
And
different,
what will the length of time be on these new ones versus 10 years?
Thanks, Caroline. Does anybody have any questions that she hasn't answered?
I just have a question.
Yeah, I've got Councilors Murray and Forbes.
I just, David, can I assume that, because we've got a lot of staff members here to go through their whole 5 minutes that you've given them to present their departments, that going into the new year, we're going to have a more fulsome opportunity to sit down with 2 or 3 of them a week, or maybe 2 of them on a night where we can talk about a bunch of stuff, different ideas that we have, and drill into some of the slides that we've presented. So can you sort of outline that?
I'll be copying down sort of the questions and the comments. Along with the 28th, we'll take a look at where we have some special sessions on particular topics that we can schedule.
Okay.
Here.
But don't wait until the new year. If you have questions for the different departments, put on the general managers from them, go out for lunch with them, have a meeting in their office.
Yeah, I think where I'm sort of heading towards is where we generally head towards every new term. Like for instance, the website. Where is Caroline? There she is. Let's talk about the website, for instance, and communications, surveys. Let's talk about where we're heading in regards to climate. Let's talk about some of the issues around retaining employees and what's going to happen when we can't, like we're all challenged within the region, the province, the country, et cetera, on getting enough people into those seats we've got in these buildings of ours. So it's those kind of discussions that I want to have, sort of at a high level, but still have them and talk about what some of the solutions are and what input we can give as residents in the community and how we can improve some things and what are our concerns going forward. That's what I'm looking at.
I'm looking forward to talking not only about the big stuff, like I say, but the little stuff. It just is something that's bothering you or there's something you're hearing out of the community that we need to know about, we need to have a conversation about. And so I'm hoping on the 28th to go at kind of a little bit of a grab bag kind of a discussion, just to get at kind of some of the reasons why, again, why did you run for council? What kind of changes would you like to see? And again, not at the macro level, we'll have that discussion as part of the strategic plan, but let's just have an open conversation about some of the things, because if we don't, you're going to be asking us halfway through the term, and we want to get into that, and we won't have it in the work plan. So I'd really like to understand what that is so we can accommodate it as best we can.
I am getting some texts from some people that are online listening and they're having a hard time hearing. So maybe when we make the presentations, we have to speak up. And there's some feedback I'm getting as well from Kelly Bond's listening and she's saying, okay, good, thank you.
Councilor Forbes.
Just one quick question. You mentioned the sustainability grant. That's a grant from the district or is it provincial? It's a district. And what kinds of things and what size of grant are we talking about?
It's really a small scale community grant program. So typical award would be somewhere $4,000 or $5,000. Really projects could be initiative to a school project, doing a communication initiative or a waste reduction initiative. Those kinds of just community-based initiatives, really to just kind of support those things out in the community, and it's really the first year we've done it. So we'll be definitely providing information to council with summaries of the objects that way.
Great, thank you.
Sorry. I'm just so interested in that reclamation project with the old wood from the old houses. Did you say wood from before homes built before 2015 or 2050?
1950.
Or sorry,
1950.
1950. No, I'm sure it's just me. No.
It sounded like 1950.
Thank you.
There's some reasons for that. I mean, that's when you're into real old growth timbers that you quite often get the fir, you quite often get larger pieces. They're very reusable. They're still not able to be used as load bearing, so they become ornamental in their next generation. But you'd have to go and get them individually inspected to use them for any other purpose than ornamental at that point. But it still makes beautiful finishes on houses, extends their use before they find their way into a waste stream of some kind, which we'd like to avoid.
Thank you. So Gavin is away. I think most of you, people have met Gavin. I think most of you have met. He's down in Bali with his son. But he'll be back next week. And so Peter and Nicola, who are deputy GMs, will give you a little bit of an overview of this, which is really one of our largest departments. No question.
Dave, so apparently you guys standing underneath that part of the roof, there's the mic and they're dropping off. So I'm not sure how we can, maybe the mic is this thing right here. So maybe we just need to push that table back.
Yeah, apparently the sound from the counselors around the table in the middle of the room is good. It just seems to be when people stand back towards the wall. So yeah, Peter's got it.
And we can see the screen right here.
and
There we go,
people will speak up,
perfect.
Please.
Excellent.
Thank you.
No worries. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Again, my name is Peter Cohen, and I'm the Deputy General Manager of Engineering Services. I'm joined this evening by Nicholas Deputy General Manager of Engineering Operations and Facilities. Again, Gavin Joyce obviously provides his regrets. He's currently enjoying some vacation. Next slide, thanks. So EPF, which is also Engineering Parks and Facilities, that's the acronym that we use, is divided into 5 key functions. I oversee the Engineering Services Department, which is made up of our transportation team, and that includes road safety, transportation and mobility planning, as well as parking. I also oversee the infrastructure planning and design team, as well as our major project delivery team as well. Our Engineering Operations and Facilities Department is overseen by Nicola and includes all of the teams relating to our stewardship and day-to-day management of our public rights-of-way, such as our streets construction and paving crews, our snow and ice removal teams, as well as our solid waste crews as well. She also looks after our design and construction teams relating to our district utilities like sewer and water systems, as well as our team that looks after construction projects and major maintenance in the roughly 100 buildings owned by the district. The scope of our parks team includes the stewardship, planning and operations of all of our parks and open spaces, as well as the operations of 2 unique facilities here at the district, which are the Maplewood Farm and the Ecology Centre. Helping to bring alignment across our teams is the integrated planning section. And this team's role is to support the more global lens of division-wide work planning, given the size and breadth of the work that we do in EPF. They also oversee our customer service staff as well. And lastly, we have our golf team, who oversee the operations of the district's Northland Golf Course and the Murdo Fraser Pitch and Putt. To give you a sense of how all of this comes together, our next slide has an organizational chart of our division. In total, we have roughly 280 staff within our division and have an annual operating budget of roughly $30 million per year. Our open capital budget is approximately $200 million. As I mentioned before, our division is led by our GM, Gavin Joyce. A couple of months ago, a new departmental structure was introduced to help support recent growth in the division's scope and complexity. Gavin is now supported by 2 deputy general managers, the 2 of us. We just walked you through the teams that roll up to both of our departments in engineering services and engineering operations and facilities. Both our parks and golf teams now report directly into the general manager, and parks has been given an elevated presence with the recent creation of a director position. This was the first step towards right-sizing this team within our organization, given the vast amount of parkland that we have here in the district and the recent increased demand for outdoor recreation. And lastly, our integrated planning team also reports into the general manager's office, given their core function in divisional-wide planning efforts. I'll now hand over to Nicola to share with you some of our ongoing project initiatives and recent highlights.
So yeah, I'm going to walk you through some of the major initiatives that Fire Division is having. But first, one of the key areas of work that we do is maintaining and constructing our infrastructure assets, such as our buildings, our bridges, roads, utilities, and so on, as Peter mentioned. And as we manage this portfolio, there are 3 primary considerations that guide our work. Firstly, we are constantly prioritizing the replacement and renewal of our aging, a lot of aging assets that are reaching end of life, and it's a priority to make sure that we maintain them in good conditions so that they can continue to provide a good level of service to the community. And that's in accordance with the district's asset management strategy. Secondly, as we replace and renew existing assets and we plan for new infrastructure, We take into account new weather patterns and the district's emission reduction targets that Caroline was talking about. And that way we are proactively mitigating and adapting to climate change. Thirdly, we ensure that our infrastructure is sized appropriately to support the increased density in our town centers that is envisioned in our OCP. So I'm going to mention just a few examples of the types of work that we have underway to support our asset management strategy. First, we're building a number of new facilities and either renewing or replacing our outdated. And I think a really good example of this is the one shown here, the Maplewood Fire and Rescue Center. It's currently under construction. And this building will replace our old Fire Hall 2 in Lynn Creek, as well as our fire training center that is on St. Denis. And also the admin functions that are currently in Fire Hall 1 in Lynn Valley are going to move to this building as well. So this project allows us to consolidate functions from 3 outdated buildings into one new energy efficient one. And this greatly reduces our overall building emissions. It frees up land for other uses and other council priorities. And it also improves fire response times east of Seymour. For utilities, every year we replace significant portions of our water, sanitary, and stormwater networks. And we also do long-term planning for things like increased density near our town centers and increased flow due to climate change. We have a project along Mountain Highway that will be starting soon. It's the Lynn Valley Trunk Sewer Project, and it is an example of the significant utility work that we need to do in order to support our town centers. We also think about how we can incorporate new green infrastructure systems into our renewal projects. And our Livable Cove project in Lower Gallant is an example of this, where we will be installing rain gardens and other green infrastructure to reduce the demand on our traditional utility systems. As Caroline mentioned as well, we have a long history at the district of actively managing our corporate energy and emissions. We've been doing this since 2011 with an energy management program, and we've recently, it was being done under facilities, and it's recently been incorporated into Caroline's group in the Climate Action Office. But with the renewal on our outdated facilities and our asset management planning, we're continually looking for opportunities to retrofit our buildings with high efficiency systems and also to improve our building envelopes. So we have a number of initiatives in our current work plan that will replace old end-of-life mechanical equipment with new energy efficient options. And a really good example of this is the full retrofit of the mechanical system at the operations center that's currently underway. We've recently finished electrifying the majority of our light duty fleet vehicles, and we're now looking to expand into some of our larger fleet vehicles. And as David mentioned, we will be piloting an electric garbage truck next year. So that's very exciting. We also have several initiatives underway to improve the cooling capacity and indoor air quality of our libraries and community centers. And that's so that they can provide a residents shelter from extreme heat and wildfire smoke. And then, of course, we live in a community that has a number of natural hazards due to our topography, such as potential debris flows and landslides. And we're continuing our proactive work to assess and mitigate against these risks. And we'll be updating a number of our assessments this year.
For the council's information, you might not know this, but because of the work that we've done to make the district more resilient, particularly around some of these natural hazards, we actually received a United Nations award for community resilience.
Lastly, we support other regional agencies achieve their infrastructure projects. So this, obviously, the North Shore Wastewater Treatment Plant you've all heard of is a major initiative by Metro Vancouver, and we have staff that are dedicated to helping Metro Vancouver deliver that project. Same thing goes for some of the MFTI projects and so on. We have staff here that liaison with those organizations to make sure that that we're well coordinated with our community. Next slide, yes. So there's still another slide of major initiatives. We do have a broad range of responsibilities. So beyond the asset management, I did want to touch on the parks and transportation portfolios as well. For our parks team, we've seen over the recent years that demand for district parks and open spaces is increasing, and what people want from their parks is changing. So when we layer on top of that the stresses of climate change on our forests and the fact that we have one of the largest park systems of any municipality in the Lower Mainland, you can see that our parks team has a very complex and an important portfolio. So to respond to that, we're going through an internal process right now to right size and restructure our Parks Department to better support the evolving community needs for these services. There's also increased demand for outdoor sports facilities, such as pickleball courts and artificial turf fields, which we are already taking some action on through our sports court and gravel field conversion programs. And we will be working with NBRC assessment for outdoor sports and recreation facilities next year, and that will inform our priorities going forward. In the meantime, we have two major artificial turf projects that are currently underway at Argyle School and Inch River Park. Our parks team will be undertaking other strategic planning work this year, such as developing a natural areas trail strategy, an urban forest management plan, and they're going to be updating the parks and open space strategic plan and developing a dog management plan. Peter looks after transportation, so I'm going to hand it over to him to talk about that portfolio.
So we know that one of the key interests from the community and also council, as well as our organization, is the work we do around our transportation and mobility. So there are a number of considerations as we progress through this work, and this includes finding ways to increase mobility choices, reduce our emissions from vehicles, and overall maintaining or improving the quality of life for our community. We have a number of annual programs that look at safety improvements at discrete locations, whether this is through expanding our sidewalk network, new or upgraded crosswalks, or working with the school districts to define and support safer ways to schools. Another key aspect of our work is realizing the transportation improvements that are envisaged in our OCP to support more people walking, cycling, and taking transit. And this is done through expanding our active transportation network and in advancing more transit service to come into the North Shore. On our active transportation network, we're in the process of installing a bridge over Lynn Creek as a better connection for the Spirit Trail, along with recently completing some other improvements along Lytton Valley Road. We're also in the early planning phase for looking at how we can extend the Spirit Trail further east over to Deep Cove, and we look forward to progressing some of this planning work next year. And then on the transit front, we were very excited earlier this year to hear a commitment from TransLink to prioritize investment and resources into a new bus rapid transit route connecting Metrotown and Park Royal via the Second Narrows that is planned to be realized within the next 5 years. Also, you may have seen construction recently start the Phipps Exchange, as can be seen by this image on the slide. And this work is being led by Moti and will really improve the facilities and experience of transit users at this key transit hub.
If I could make just one comment, I think we're probably going to have a workshop on active transportation. It's very laudable. I think that's where everybody's going, but it's also can be very difficult, particularly if it affects parking spots on somebody's street, and so they can be quite contentious. So that we probably need to update you on the sort of the policy framework that we've got in place. Ensure that we've got your support. Because the worst thing we can do as staff is go out there and say this makes sense. We've got it in a policy somewhere or a plan, and we're going to do it. And the community rises up, and council says, "Oh no, we're not touching that." So we do need to have a conversation fairly early about that, particularly as we move forward on some of those initiatives.
So with this slide, I'm going to just share a few of our recent achievements. So these are projects that have been completed in the past year or year and a half. So firstly, we've made major strides in reducing the risk of flooding that we saw back in 2014. And that was by completing the major storm culvert upgrade under Gillen Avenue in Deep Cove, and also the Kilmer Creek daylighting project that was associated with the redevelopment of Argyle School. These projects, along with previous construction of debris flow barriers on several of our creeks, have significantly reduced that risk of flooding that we're seeing in the North Region and in Transmarine events. We also recently completed new and exciting indoor and outdoor recreation facilities, such as Lionsgate Community Recreation Center, which has our first express library, the new Bridgeman Playground, which is the district's first fully accessible playground, and the recent opening of the Belle Isle Temporary Dog Park. For transportation, we've seen recent significant investment and commitments, as Peter mentioned, and we've also had the recent upgrades to the Highway 1 interchanges near the Ironworkers Bridge, and we've got many improvements in the cycling and pedestrian networks. I think Caroline mentioned this one as well. We completed a major mechanical project at the District Hall, converting our old, oversized, and extremely inefficient chiller with an electric air source heat pump. And that has significantly reduced our emissions. We're also looking at ways to improve our best practices, our work practices. And a really good example of this is the recent adoption of our project management framework and the rollout of the supporting software, which is actually happening this month. And then I think some others, yeah. So before I finish up tonight, we did want to share with council 3 emerging challenges that will impact the work that we do over the next term. So firstly, we continue to experience external market pressures as many are experiencing now in this world we live in. And this, whether this is from general rising costs of inflation or the impacts of labor shortages and disruptions to supply chains. And because of these market pressures and constraints, we're finding it challenging to deliver our ambitious portfolio of capital projects within their original budget or timeline. So with a potential recession on the horizon, we will need to take a realistic view of what we can achieve with our available resources. And lastly, as has been a common theme in much of the information shared tonight, we need to continue to assess risks and prioritize work that makes our community more resilient to the effects of climate change. So with that, we're happy to take some questions. Thank you for your time.
Any questions?
A comment that leads to a question.
Councilor Mah?
Thanks for the presentation. This was something I was really interested in. I think most people would agree that the top issues are probably going to be housing and mobility, but community building is going to be huge. Traffic, speed, sports field. You mentioned dog management plan, so that would include dog parks.
Yes. So there's a temporary dog park that just opened in Belle Isle, and the plan to come up with a bit more of a strategy around how we're going to manage that going forward.
Looking forward to that.
So in regards to the capacity to deliver, and I know that it's hard to say we are having challenges with delivering these projects because public servants are here to serve and at the will of council produce what the direction that council wants to go in. So I don't think I've ever heard this in all the years I've sat at this table that it's a challenging time, but it is a challenging time. I heard an engineer say a few years ago, who's now retired, Steve Ono, said when we were dealing with huge amounts of water, the intensity of these climate systems used to rain all the time on the North Shore from October to April. And now it's sunny in Edgemont and like a torrential downpour in the Cove. And he said, we can't hold back Mother Nature anymore. So that was a pretty big admission from an engineer who, we're having challenges pushing her back. So are we going to be having that discussion, David? Again, another more fulsome discussion about the prioritization of different projects going forward. And then, from a council perspective, we want to bring initiatives and motions forward, how we're going to manage that as well. Because if we're having a capacity to deliver what we've got on our plate right now, adding more is going to be even more challenging. So I look forward to that discussion early in the first quarter, I hope.
We're finding as a result of COVID, we've always had what we call a tail, which is projects that we couldn't get done that year that carry over into the next year. But that tail has got larger and larger and larger. And so we've had to going into next year, anticipating perhaps a recession, looking at all the market pressures and the supply chain stuff. We're probably going to try to get everything done that we set out to do in 2022 and make sure we've got it done by 2023 with a few other things. But that's the discussion we're going to have as part of the budget priorities. We're simply with, at one point we had up to 85 regular full-time positions vacant. It's calmed down a little bit, but we just don't have the resources to move all this stuff ahead at the same time. So that's where it's going to come into a discussion with council, not in terms of just programs, but also in terms of actual projects. Because many of those projects we actually contract out, but we're finding that they don't have the resources. And Gavin always mentions to me that he finds it quite frustrating because staff will quit, will go work for a consultant, and they'll come back and send us bills which are twice as high as the wages they were earning here. So that's just the business, and it's right through the region, right through the province.
Along with the same thing that Lisa's talking about, Dave, will it be in the strategic plan planning meeting as well, because we may have things set to start next year or the year after. But we'll be looking at all of that as to whether those are the same things we still want to start and the timing if we do.
Yeah, so what we'll start on, I think it's December 12th, the conversation around high-level budget, what we set aside, where we've set it aside, what those projects are, what those program changes are, and just have a really good conversation with council as to how we sort through that. One of the things that I've done in the past is actually use a bit of a survey for council to say how important this is or not important, because quite often we've done all kinds of different ways to do that, using little tags and stuff like that. There's lots of ways to end up there, but we need to have that discussion and start to have it in December, and it'll roll into January, because we would like, to have a budget that you're comfortable with, that we think the community is going to be comfortable with, staff can actually deliver on, and also a really clear idea as to what our priorities are, what the subsets of those priorities, and where we can actually deliver on those.
I think the other thing too to remember as we talk about the capacity to deliver, the fluidity of, the employment market in regards to retaining, but just seeing people moving around, like governments, and, we're kind of all stealing from one another. And so that's sort of a challenging thing, but also remembering that I think it was a few years ago, we had an employee in our Parks Department. We've got two, one right now that was going to retire this year. And if that person, Dave Hibbert, had left, I think the number of years, the longest serving employee in the Parks Department a few years ago would have been less than 5 years. Whereas, he's been here since the beginning of time. This one has, that one has over there. This one has. No, I'm only 25. And so, we've got some that have been here for 35 years. Most companies were 35 years. You stayed in a company for 35 years. That was how you, checked off, you did well. Now it's like, well, we'll stay for 5 years, but then we got to experience something else. So that we got to tie all those things together, knit them all together, and try to figure out how we manage going forward with all these projects that we got to look at. That was a good presentation. Thank you.
I think our project management framework is kind of key to this as well. It's making sure that we do the proper, like we identify the needs early on, that we're looking ahead, that we then take it through, concepts, and make sure that engagement and things before we're asking for the money. I think we've had the tendency to ask for the money
and then try to catch up.
And then we start to plan it, and we've had a few false starts. So this when you hear about the project management framework, it's one of the ways that we're hoping to.
Really good. We need a
about
workshop on that.
I was just going to say about this general issue, though, that this is something all municipalities are.
Absolutely.
In 2007, I was on the Labor Relations Bureau for Metro Vancouver, and we released a report about the graying of the municipal employee and how we were 15 years away from
Gray is the new brunette.
from municipalities being in a lot of trouble. We're 15 years now out from that report. That report predicted that at this point, municipalities across the region were going to be in a big problem because they were on a steady aging pace, and the baby boomers were leaving, and they had the corporate memory, and this was all very predictable. That doesn't mean that we have effective tools and solutions to address it.
No,
it's happening throughout the region, but big challenge.
We're also finding for a whole bunch of reasons. You told me 20 years ago that we would have had to hire internal project management folks to manage the project managers for a project hire.
Yeah.
We found the litigation and some of the cost issues that if you don't actually have an internal resource that's actually managing the project manager, you got a real issue. And then you can end up in a project where all of a sudden they come back and they say, I don't know, we're short $10 million, or they say halfway through the project, we're going to be short $10 million. We're down in tools. Give us $10 million. So lots of interesting discussion.
You should really be grayer than you are.
I'm old.
I know. Well, yeah. Well, partially. Yeah.
Camera, if you had a bald spot or you were, self-conscious, that thing is staring at the back of my head.
Workshop, more informal.
Yes, they are.
Totally.
Absolutely. It was something I was thinking about saying before we had this meeting. What really is the difference between a workshop and a regular meeting of council? The intent of what shirt sleeve sessions or workshops was a freer flow of ideas, people can ask questions. The intent is not to be espousing your final decision on an item or something, where you prepared a statement to respond to it. It really is about quick questions back and forth and quick commentary, conversation, getting to know each other better. That's going to be a big part of the start of this term. But workshops can be an effective tool at advancing a specific issue and spending a night on maybe only 1 or 2 issues rather than a regular agenda where we may have 10, 12 items on an agenda. So,
and we will be returning to the approach that we had done before in the past. We kind of got away from, which is getting away from resolutions and workshops. Rather, what I'll try to do, because I attend most of them, or the GM will, is we'll summarize at the end of the meeting the direction that we think council has given us, not a formal resolution, but we'll have that recorded in the minutes, so at least you have a record. And that's kind of the direction we think that you gave us. And then, of course, to move it along, most items along, you have to go to regular council.
Councilor Forbes.
I just wanted to ask, the software you mentioned, is that project management software that you're just getting now? All right, good. Good timing.
Thank you.
Good Andy up. Money guy.
The budgets, you say Gavin was the money guy.
Yeah, it's been working well. Just speak up, don't be shy.
That's the microphone.
He doesn't have a problem speaking up.
Let me start by saying that the chief administrative officer does not have the market clerk on brain.
Right.
You have to move up a little bit. You have to be away from that roof. There you go. You're good now. There we go.
So it's through my office, as chief financial officer, that the financial administration and the exercise of the controlled supervision of all the financial affairs of the municipality take place. I have a great team working behind me, starting with Rick as my deputy, and Andrew, who is our new director of digital services. So with regards to, and I'm not going to read what's on the screen here, I'm assuming everybody can read it. With regards to our technological footprint, we support every single line of business in the district and our partner agencies provide. We have over 1,500 pieces of hardware, which includes laptops, cell phones, etc. There's over 3,700 different pieces of software that we manage, and 10 of our largest systems, be they boards like JD Edwards or EnterGov, or Report a Problem, which is now on our website, or GeoTools, which I'm sure you will have used or will use as you get into your roles as counselors. Those operate 24/7, 365. There is no downtime. Next slide. So what you see on this slide is the key departments that lay a solid foundation that supports the delivery of all district services and partners. So from that perspective, the administration of finance and the administration of our digital footprint take place. And I'm just going to keep it at that, short and sweet. This is a pictorial representation of the structure within the finance and digital department. Our operating budget is approximately $9 million in total. There's 79 FTEs on the PowerPoint up there. It's roughly split in the middle, 50% finance, 50% IT. And our annual capital budget on projects is about $3 million. And as I mentioned, the Director of Digital and IT Services is a newly created position. As we move forward in the 21st century, there's lots of work to be done to bring us into that digital future. And so we brought that talent to bear down that path. Next slide, please, right there. Great, thank you. So this is a very high level summary of the financial resources at the end of last year, which you can find in our annual report. So approximately $300 million of financial assets, about $180 million of liabilities of all kinds. Our asset portfolio, which Nicola and Peter spoke to, primarily is about $2.5 billion. And our risk reserves, which we do use to manage the risks that do pop up from time to time when things happen, about 27 million. And our statutory reserves that support our programs on an annual basis of about $120 million. And our budget moving forward, it's just a little bit lower than an average of $400 million a year.
You have to speak up a little bit, Andy. You're soft spoken tonight.
Am I-
No.
No, it's good. Okay, good feedback, Fred. All right, so highlights. So right now, we're in the middle of a review of developer contributions, which I expect will be done in Q1 or Q2 of next year. Municipal finance reform, Mr. Stewart sits on the UBCM committee, stewarding the municipal finance reform that we've all been talking about. And Rick sits on a Metro Vancouver Municipal Finance Reform Subcommittee as well. We lead Asset Management BC in the province. I co-chair that myself. There's a partnership committee, which is comprised of LGMA, GFOA, Planning Institute, a number of others, Civic Info, Municipal Finance Authority. They all sit around that table, and it's a great place to be for us. We lead the province and sometimes nationally on the stewardship of our infrastructure. So for all the challenges that you face, we're still in a good place. Enhancing service delivery through an evolving mobile workforce. So the other side of citizen-centric digital services is having a mobile workforce. So when that report a problem, as an example, it gets phoned in, it's directed straight to a person. There's a workflow that assigns it to a person. That person gets it on his iPhone. He's standing there looking at the puddle. We know it's getting fixed, and he closes the work order and closes the system. Other part of our new service moving forward with regards to the online delivery of citizen services is we are moving to a single sign-on for all of our citizens. So when you log on to DNV, you'll have one account, it'll access all your services to one account. So that's coming, that's next up. Next slide, please. So we do live in a limited funding environment. So what we do every year through the planning process, the budgeting process, we continuously review our cost structure, seeking value for money in both operations and our capital projects. From a sustainable service delivery perspective, we strive for steady state funding. Think about what Nicola talked about. We replace, say, 5 kilometers of pipe every year. We know that it takes 50 years to do that. So there's a steady state funding component to our projects. What we do though, is we debt finance strategically. So when large projects pop up, like the new fire training center or maybe Delbrook Recreation Center, we will debt finance parts of those to get us over that lump or that hump. Digital transformation is a significant shift in focus as we focus on our citizens. I've spoken briefly about Report a Problem. We actually won the inaugural Municipal Finance World Award for that work that we did there. So the district does make good things happen in many ways. Long-term financial planning is the companion plan to our corporate and strategic plans and our asset management plan. That's where it all comes together. And statutorily, every year we have to submit a balanced budget. Okay, and that's with the province. From a risk management perspective, we monitor risks, we anticipate, and we prevent. We try not to react. Digital and finance staff are continuously assessing risks. The top risk for us right now from a digital perspective is cybersecurity. When we pivoted out of the pandemic, we had to go to a distributed workforce model. So we are now at the point where we're looking at stabilizing, I'll call it post-pandemic, we're not of it yet, but what is the balance between work from home and work in the office? And so we need to be resourced up with all that technology, to make that work. So I think we've got a stable foundation for right now, but it'll probably need some tweaks. And climate change, as we know, affects everyone. And one of the things that we're working on is setting a baseline to track GHGs for both the district and the community. And that is going to come back to you at some point in the form of a carbon budget. My final comment is that staff are here to help council manage these priorities and issues, and we will bring recommendations forward to you for your consideration on all of these matters.
I was going to mention, Andy, that we certainly had a fair bit of conversation with the last term about what is we hear about carbon budget, and it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so that's one of the discussions we're going to have with you as a council is what does that mean? Does that actually say we're going to allocate a certain percentage of the budget towards climate change, or does that mean that we're going to better track all of the different activities and the costs associated with what we're doing to try to mitigate and deal with it? So we'll be coming back to you at some point to talk about that.
So I'm open for questions.
Do you have
And I thought carbon budget was more related to just GHG emissions across the organization, that you have a total amount of GHG emissions from the organization allotted in different places. I didn't know it was getting to the point that it was directly related to a value.
Some folks will say, when you adopt a different kind of a way of, you have an open ditch rather than a pipe, there's some savings that are associated with capital savings that are associated with that. And so how do you track the value of using natural assets as opposed to your hard infrastructure? So there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. And we've got to agree on a language and a goal. Otherwise, we're just going to go, back and forth like this. It's not going to serve us as well as if we have a really focused understanding of what we're trying to achieve and how we want to report that, how we want to budget.
Yeah, without getting too far into natural assets, it's a very open conversation nationally with the Public Sector Accounting Board starting to talk about setting standards. So that conversation is continuing with support of the University of Waterloo and the Municipal Natural Asset Initiative. If you've been to their website, have a look at them. Questions?
So that raises an extra question, which I'll just follow on that then. Is that what we were talking about last year, Dave, or in the last couple of years, where we were talking about in West Van was a little bit ahead of us?
Yeah.
And the discussion at that time was sort of, so you could record like your GHGs and then there would be trade-offs with, you put in 100 more trees or that kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, that's one way you can approach it. And the concern that I had expressed back then is it's somewhat superficial to attach a very nominal amount to the fact that you put 10 more trees in and say, look, we got a carbon budget here. I value the amount of the trees, and then how much work is actually going into that kind of reporting as opposed to the changes that you're actually making in the infrastructure, the investment that you're making. So that's going to be a really good, like a philosophical discussion as to how we approach it.
And you're saying there's a national group that is looking at this, and so that
It's a very early conversation with the Public Sector Accounting Board.
so we're not
Natural
standardized.
standards don't normally consider natural assets. It's very, I'll say, market driven, market focused.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, if you look at the town of Gibson, for example, they have natural wetlands and they value those at $3.2 million. That's pretty much the equivalent of the water infrastructure they would have put in. So what is the avoidance benefit of not implementing that infrastructure and the GHG impact on that? So that's the best example I can think of right now. However, we do need to set a baseline and we need to know what our carbon is. And then we need to track on how we reduce it as well. So that's part of carbon budgeting is grinding it down towards net zero.
My original question was on budgeting. If we're not going to get into the strategic meetings until, well, beginning discussion,
September 12th.
but that'll be kind of superficial, just introduction. And we're not back until January to start getting into it more. How is that going to impact your timing of bringing the budget forward?
Well, about 80% of what we do is steady state replacement. So approximately 20% of what we do in capital is a conversation, I think, that
Well, I'm thinking of the whole cycle of, we get the community involved and the.
Well, so that's what we want. We want to start the conversation in December 12th to say, this is kind of a lay of the land. This is how the budget looks right now. These are where some of the pressures are. We've got at very least, probably at least $2 million worth of adjustments we're going to have to do to bring in a level of a budget that we will find acceptable. And then we'll have kind of a lay of the land, because my sense is, and I've looked at all your brochures, the issues that we identified last term haven't changed that much. They're long-term issues such as transportation and the economy and the jobs and the environment and housing affordability in particular. I think those are going to be still with us this term. And it's just a matter of what we're going to do. And so it may not be that big of a shift. The only thing that's kind of been added is organizational resilience. That's something that affects how much we can deliver. But I think we can get back in fairly early in January and start to really get into some of this stuff, and then also talk about what degree do we want to engage the community. done it all kinds of different ways over the years. I've doing dog and pony shows out in community centers. And more often than not, there were more staff than there were people. There's not necessarily, unless there's a high tax increase, people aren't generally all that interested in budgets. So it's more around priorities. What's important, community that we get done with council, and we can tell you what we think we have to do, like it or not, just to make sure that we do. We have to have a budget. We have to have a budget made anyway, and we prefer to have most of the difficult stuff dealt with by the end of January, maybe creeping into February.
Yeah, we also changed the way we do a lot of the budgeting several years ago, where we now go to a 5-year budget. So when you see the capital plan as we're going through the process, you're going to see the next 5 years of planned spending, and twofold. That allows you to just have a much more simple process of going through the budgeting as we go through into the spring. And what do we have to actually pass the budget by middle of May?
The budget has to be submitted by and we have to have our tax bylaws set in April, just to get the processing ready.
We have the ability to produce mini budget updates, and if we decide to make a significant enough change that we have to affect the budget, we'll go through a budgeting process specific to that item.
Sometime in the next, what's the date? Rick? For the seventh amendment?
12.
December 5. So financial plan amendment for the 2022 budget will be coming with the tweaks that you're talking about.
We don't want to say that the budget's is not cast in stone, because you can't do too much wiggling there. But the fact of the matter is, as things come up through the year, we have the ability in council to approve them. And then what we do is we come in at the end of the year and they say, these are all the things that council has approved, and this is how we balance the budget.
The formal budgeting process that we go through at the end is more or less to lead into tax distribution process.
Right.
But inter-year, you can have other adjustments that don't affect the levy immediately. And
the way our bylaws are written, it's a 5-year approval. So a lot of the 2023 budget is already in place. All we're going to do is clean that up and line it up with what Peter and Nick were talking about.
But it's a living document and can change.
Any questions?
Thanks,
Thank you very much. My friend and colleague, the community health nurse and mayor of the city of North Vancouver, would say that sitting is the new smoking. So if people want to stretch, stand, get a cold drink, we can take a minute and get back into it. We've been hitting you with a lot of numbers and stuff. Get
I'd like to
people
say
re-energized.
finance was the only one that had large font on the slides. And Andrew, I think you need to deal with this, especially on those reorg charts that no one can see, even on that big screen.
So we're intentionally letterboxing the boilerplate slide, which means we're wasting about 20%.
Yeah, like, look at all that white space. I've talked about that before. In the signage. Get me going.
It's letterboxing.
Now coming into the room.
Letterboxing within letterboxing, like it's literally.
Are we taking a break? We're taking a break.
Taking a minute.
We're gonna take, we're gonna lead us in some stretching. Dan?
Your shoulders, everybody.
All right, everybody move around. I'm gonna go. Phone my child.
Yeah. Get some water.
And get some water. Stay away from glasses, don't break Nick. So you're welcome to have that.
Oh, yes, yes. Fair enough, I can't juggle. I can't juggle. Thank you. Yeah. Actually a nice room to sing in. Nice dry acoustic.
Well, we all sang along quietly.
Yes, I heard a little bit of that. Tried to tune some of it out.
Good to see everybody.
Trying to think. It was after the election, but before I was sworn in, got approached by Brent about
Whether you were the first person.
Go on.
I was tempted to go onto that, but
No, eventually everybody in North Vancouver.
Wait just a second for the presentation. Okay, you're off mute now?
We should be.
Yeah, that took care of itself. It just took 30 seconds.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Your Worship, members of council. Look forward to giving a brief presentation tonight on the Planning, Properties and Permits Division. Now, I really have enjoyed thoroughly hearing from all my professional colleagues tonight, and it's with a tremendous pride that I'm able to present and speak about the division I work within and lead, an excellent team of folks who really have a commitment and dedication to ensuring that this community is preserved and enhanced for livability, for folks to go to school, to raise a family, to work in, to age comfortably in. But we know we have some really key challenges. David mentioned those around transportation, around the environment and climate action, around the housing and affordable housing, significant challenges there, as well as diversity and inclusion. And so we will get into that further in the presentation. I've provided a bit of a handout for everyone to take with them tonight. And within it, you will find a bit of an annotated summary of all the key policies and bylaws that we administer through our division, as well as some statistics that have been shared with council previously, either through the regional growth strategy that is before the Metro Board, or a nice little summary of the affordability levels of all the various supportive and social housing projects that council has approved in the last 11 years. And then hot off the presses, we have on the last page, a summary of the approvals, the net approvals of units by year. So you can see each year going back to the adoption of the official community plan and the type of unit. So we typically provide this summary information on an annual basis, but since it's the end of the council term, we thought it would be useful to just show it in perspective of council terms reaching back to 2011. There's a million ways to slice and dice the data. Of course, we do provide that summary every year. So just moving to the next slide then, in terms of our functions, we're broken down into these 4 main groups, as well as the administrative support staff. So in the planning area, you may have spoken to Jennifer Patton. She's the assistant general manager that looks after this area. And this includes both the sort of forward-looking component, which is the community planning and working with council on the official community plan, heritage planning, childcare, and grants. And then we also have the development planning side, which is the part that responds to applications that comes in and provides recommendations and advice to council. Takes up a big chunk of many agendas. Next is the regulatory review and compliance team, and Brett Dwyer is the assistant general manager, looks after that side. And that includes all the various aspects of enforcement and compliance, consumer protection, such as a building inspection, development engineering, and environmental sustainability operations, and of course, permits and licenses. Then we have our real estate and properties group. So this is the group that looks after buying and selling district lands, leasing district lands, all at council's direction. And then we also have our new team, which is a team of 1 right now, Lova. So I look forward to introducing her to each of you in time. And she's our new manager looking after that area to help us advance council's objectives identified in the official community plan action plan going forward for employment and economy. Next slide. So this is just how the team is broken down in terms of reporting structure. I won't go into that in great detail since I just covered it. But in terms of budgets, we generate a fairly significant amount of revenue from the development application process, a little over $16 million a year. And that's primarily made up of building permit application fees. That's made up of license fee and lease fees, and of course, business licensing. In terms of expenditures, it's primarily staff, 106 staff in our division, and those expenditures are typically the staff and then support costs related to those. So next slide, please. In terms of highlights, a big part of our work is projects and bringing policies forward to council. So this is an unheralded area, and so I wanted to just emphasize it a bit on our highlights. Our staff team responds to around 30,000 inquiries a year for development applications. This is everything from the very minor question, how high can my fence be, to the very complex question, can I develop 500 units at this location? Okay, so we respond to those inquiries. There's about 4,500 permits that we process every year. These are building and trade permits, and about 16,000 inspections occur associated with those applications. We also have about 5,800 business license applications every year. Approximately 40% of those are actually non-resident business licenses, so they don't live in the district, but they provide business services here, and so they get a business license here. And then about 25% of that is home-based businesses, okay? And the balance being non-home-based living and residing in the district. We process about 70 planning applications every year. These are rezonings, development permits, variance permits, temporary use permits. And in terms of grants, our team in community planning provides advice and works with various council committees on providing core service grants, community grants, heritage grants, and childcare grants, totaling about $2.1 million a year. So, and that's an area we will be coming back to council with and seeking some direction on in terms of increasing those amounts in response to the consultations we've been having with our service providers and in response to the challenge of COVID-19 and coming out of that. So we will be providing advice through the 2023 budget. And then finally, our bylaw services group responds to about 2,000 requests for service every year. And that's in addition to their routine work where they're traveling around the community, dealing with parking matters and so on. So that's a bit of an idea of the scale of the work we do. Next slide, please. All right, so in terms of some highlights, and I'm gonna pass over this quite quickly because there's lots of different things going on this slide, but quite quickly, some of the key ones that I really should mention that council's provided direction on in the last few years, and in particular last year. The official community plan review. So the official community plan, award-winning plan adopted in 2011, was reviewed by the community, and with council direction, we produced white papers and then consultation with that, and then an action plan coming out of that. And council really was interested in what are the parts of the plan that really need to be emphasized and focused on so that we can deliver on those key concerns that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of my presentation. Okay. I won't go through these laboriously, but just mention a couple highlights. In terms of a few down is the childcare strategy. 2 years ago, council identified the need for an additional 200 childcare spaces a year for 10 years. Okay? We've actually exceeded that. We've had 630 spaces created in the last 2 years. So we are leaders in responding to childcare needs in the community. And that's not just a childcare need, that is an economic development need. People need good childcare in order to work, to go to school, to live their lives. So it's all of these, of course, have interests not just in one area, but in multiple areas of our work. The tree bylaw, written in 2012, it hadn't been comprehensively reviewed until last year. We brought forward some recommended changes to the fee structure and to the fine structure. That was endorsed by council recently. Additionally, I'll point out, these are on the top left, those are some just gross figures of the amount of units that council approved over the last 4 years. Okay, and you can see there that totals 1,818 units. In the gross total. And if you just break that down on an average year, and of course that never happens if you have an average year, it always fluctuates every year. But if you just took that 1,818 units divided by 4, that's 450 units a year on average. And the official community plan anticipated demand in the community of 500 units a year. So we're not far off what the anticipated demand would be for the last 4 years. Preceding years were higher on average than 500 a year. Okay.
COVID.
That's right. All right, so I'll just, I want to quickly skip forward 2 slides, just to a couple images. And since we're talking about, thank you, and since we're talking about supportive and social housing, council advanced in the last couple of years some really important projects around supportive and social housing on West 16th. So this was a supportive housing project to be administered by Rain City, the on-site operator, and managed, funded, pardon me, by BC Housing in the district. And that's a great example of providing housing for homeless and those at risk of homelessness. And we need more of that in this community. And that's a really important point going forward. Just a couple others, I'll mention the 600 West Queens and the 276 Orwell, that's right beside Fifth Exchange. These are 86 units and 90 unit projects on district lands, significant capital contributions to make these happen. And the success that council has been leading is going to pay dividends into the future for this. Another just at the end of last year was Riverside. This is a project we're going to be working with Metro Vancouver Housing. the first project that we're working with Metro Vancouver Housing on, and we were very happy to receive that. They're currently going through their due diligence process right now, and we look forward to them concluding that and us moving forward with that. The property's already rezoned, so we look forward to that.
I think we could just mention, yeah, the council, the last council made a decision that we would go through a process of identifying lands that were suitable for social and supportive housing. And in fact, we've taken the initiative to actually rezone them before we go through the process. I was in a meeting this afternoon with the provincial government, and as I am occasionally, was quite critical about the consecutive way they approach these projects that drag them on for a long time rather than, find ways to improve the process and to shorten it up. Because a lot of these projects have been around for now 3 and 4 years, and we're just now getting to get them in the ground.
And I will go into a little bit of the mechanics of that conversation too in the next slide.
Can you speak to the Delbert Lands project and just where that's at?
Sure. Yeah, so I asked them to give me a little update on each of them because I know they provided us with a sort of their detailed schedule going forward. And so the building permit is in process, and they're looking to have it in the early spring so they can start construction and have something in place by 2025.
Recording in
We're
progress.
following their schedule, and we're committed to meeting their schedule needs.
Yeah, good, thank you.
That's 600.
Yeah, 600 West Queens, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't catch those numbers. When I heard permanent process and then I didn't catch the rest of it.
In terms of numbers of units?
For Queens.
Yeah, so the building permit is in process.
Yeah.
We're following their schedule they gave us in terms of achieving their building permit early next year. And then they're going to start their construction and they want to be open by 2025.
So starting construction next year?
Starting construction next year, that's right. All right, so if, I'll just mention quite quickly, this is another summary that's going to be in your package so you can take with you. And this is the net units, so different from gross, but net units looking all the way back from 2011 when the official community plan was adopted up into November 2022. This is a summary. On the top, you'll see broken down by town center, as well as those outside centers. And then the housing type on the left-hand side column. And then I've just tucked in the official community plan anticipated demand for each town center at the bottom. So you can compare the difference between how many net units that have been approved through zoning and how many units were anticipated or that the demand would be there to 2030. Okay. And we'll be, again, as I mentioned, summarizing this information in the PACE development report, but you have it in your package tonight too. So just
ask you about that number on the last slide at the bottom, the expected number 2011 to 2030. Like, for example, were those numbers created in 2011? So that's why it's so much less than actually what we need today.
Yeah, so this was 2011, and so all I'm doing is comparing it to the existing policy.
That's the OCP.
That's right. And if you want to see where the projection going forward is, the two key pieces are, and I'll mention that later, is one, the regional growth strategy. So we've worked with Metro Vancouver on that, and those numbers are included in the package showing the progression of potential new units as well as population. And as well, we completed a housing needs report that was required by the province.
Yeah.
In that report, it summarizes the anticipated need as well. Now, the interesting thing, and I'll just mention this right away off the bat, that housing need report is a provincial methodology. It's purely based on projecting past decisions into the future. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily reflect the needs that we think might be there, such as more housing on the deeply affordable side, for example, or more care units. Okay, so we have to be very careful when we look at those housing needs reports, and especially if the province decides to mandate them.
Can you explain the difference between net and gross?
Sure. So an example is, let's say I had a 10 unit rental building, and I replaced it with, and let's say it was market housing rental, and I replaced it with 5 units of market rental and 5 units of affordable housing. There's a net reduction in rental units, market rental, but there's obviously a net increase in affordable rental. Okay, so at the end of the day, what we do is we subtract, we add up all the existing units, and then we add up all the units that the council has approved, and then the net number is what you see here.
And then maybe for the benefit of the new counselors, like for like, how that sort of evolved, because it wasn't necessarily, if we were taking rental units and turning it into market housing, it wasn't necessarily that we're replacing those one-to-one, those size of units, the number of bedrooms, for example, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so a typical project, just going way back to 2012, Coriolis did a report for Metro Vancouver and identified that about 60 to 93% of the existing rental in the district would be, there would be development interest in it. And so what we've seen is projects, let's say there's 100 units of rental housing on the property. The developers, to make the project viable, will often come in with 3 to 4 times the number of units. They'll be looking for higher density. And we'll have a conversation about the tenure mix and the number of bedrooms mix. And then we work with council, seek direction, and come back hopefully with something that meets council's intent, objectives, as we go through that conversation back and forth. One of the key points that Councillor Murray raises is like for like. So in late 60s, early 70s, when we had a lot of this construction happen, the units were larger, land was cheaper, and it was typically that you might have just more space within the unit. The typical market unit that could be sold at a reasonable price is often a smaller unit, but might have a different range of bedrooms. And one of the key things we had to look at was how many bedrooms are we replacing? Are we replacing an equivalent number of bedrooms, or are we losing bedrooms? Are we creating more small units? Well, a key thing to understand is actually the Canadian population is changing. And half of all households in the district are 1 or 2 people. Okay, so, but over the last 11 years, and I remember this number because it's so unique in Metro Vancouver, is that if you don't include care beds and you don't include senior units, and you just look at every other unit council approved in the last 11 years, so all of those units, other than care beds and other than seniors, it's 73% of all those units are 2-bedroom or larger. So it's what we call family-oriented housing. Okay, if you look at almost every other community, like the city of North Vancouver, it flips. It completely flips that. And most communities try to achieve between 25 and 30% 2-bedroom or larger, okay, at a minimum. But we're at the mid-70s. Okay, so actually it's now starting to raise questions. Are we going to have enough studios and ones to meet the needs going forward, given that that actually is a growing segment of our population quite significantly? So or will we have just extra bedrooms? So it's raising key questions with every application. What is the need going forward? Not what's the need in 1965, but what's the need going forward for the community in terms of bedrooms and in terms of the type of a mix. What we do know is we don't have enough rental and we don't have enough low to moderate income housing. So that's a key focus.
And that has evolved over the years, because at the beginning of the OCP, it was mostly 1-bedroom units that the developers wanted.
Especially
and that has evolved over the years with council direction. Can I just ask you one more thing? So those numbers right there, those are rezoned and occupied?
Rezoned, just rezoned.
So not occupied?
Yeah, occupied would be half to 50 to 60% of that would be occupied.
And then projections out to 2030 in regards to completions of town centers?
Well, that's sort of the difference, would be the kind of the projection. If that's what you wanted to achieve, if we believe that this was still the estimated demand, then it's the difference between these numbers.
Yeah, those numbers changed over the,
Some of
they
these-
changed. They're
Well,
I think this is the challenge. Yeah, and this is the challenge going forward, is trying to figure out a consistent way to see these numbers. Because it's always a new way of presenting it, and
this is why we try to produce.
We've been using most of this standard for a while, but the challenge, there are some differences, like one that bugs me. I was part of the council that created the OCP, and it was a 20-year plan from 2010 to 2030, not from halfway through 2011 when it was ratified. And so there's a 1.5 years of data that was intended to be a part of the 20-year plan that we've decided is just not part of the calculations.
let's look at that part.
And I think it's a really, really useful point, that when we look at this, this isn't a target. These are not targets. These are not
17 of the OCP, they're estimates.
High level estimates, and they get adjusted over time as we learn more.
Again, just to try to get a benchmark, because we go back to the community, we get in a fight with Dr. Cost or with Mr. Teven, because each of us is measuring it from a different starting.
That's the problem.
But the plan goes from 2010 to 2030, or at least in 2008, when we started planning for the plan, intended to go 20 years from 2010 to 2030. We just didn't get to the point of ratifying it until into 2011. And if you did that, we would be a lot closer to target, because in 2010, we happened to approve both a bunch of development along Marine Drive, and we started the Sealand.
And why did we, sorry, Mayor, a little, but why, what was the decision to change that from 2010 to 2011?
Oh, the 2011 tracking was essentially from adoption of the OCP. And so it anticipated about 500 units a year. And so that's why we try to report back to that general figure. And the reality is, these numbers will adjust. The plan never lasts in 30 years, right, or 20 years. The plan is always adjusted as we learn more. So those are the targets that
document, and it's subject to change.
Subject to change based on trends and demands in the community. I mean, some people would argue that the demand well exceeds what is shown here, right? I think we heard that tonight. But others might say, no, it's less. So it essentially is a conversation that needs to occur with the planning exercise.
So my last request would be to include that number from 2010 until the adoption, just like when we do the tax rate, our finance guys slip in those numbers to change things. I want to see what it looks like if we slip in the number from 2010 when the document was completed, but not yet adopted, because ultimately,
But and again, the other issue that you raised was an important one, which is bedroom counts.
Yeah.
In the Emery Place issue, we went from 61 units up to 84 units of purpose-built.
less
rental.
bedrooms.
But the number of bedrooms decreased in it.
So
And
no
some of that makes
affordable
absolute
housing.
sense, as you say. In the last 20 years, we've gone from 2.9 people per household down to 2.6 people per household for this year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it means you need 10% more units to house the same number of people.
Yeah.
Which across 32,000 addresses, an additional 3,000 housing units to house the same number of people.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna say, keeping in mind, when you look at that, when you look at the word, use the word market, you're really depending on the private sector to deliver that for the most part. When you look at the word social housing and cases rental, it's us partnering with other levels of government. And so it's not something that we can just go out and purchase land and build it ourselves and operate it ourselves. That's not our business model. So it takes negotiation. You have to be conscious of the speed in which those partners that we have out there, whether it's private sector or public sector, are able to move it forward. And certainly that's been a real hot issue, I know, with the minister, now to be the premier, about the length of time it gets to have, especially some of this affordable rental and social housing actually delivered processes.
I think, like, for me, the only thing this really tells me that's significant is how few social housing and supportive housing we've built in the last number of years. I don't really care what people thought it was going to be in 2010. It's irrelevant. It's completely changed. The world is different, and we are in desperate need of more social housing and more affordable housing.
Which you need a partner for. That's the challenge on that, is that we saw significant commitments from the provincial government. $7.2 billion was going to be earmarked towards building social and affordable and supportive housing across the province of BC. And I think the reason why they've wiped and rinsed and repeated and wiped their board with BC Housing is that they have fallen short of those targets by a significant margin.
I think
For some reasons, because they have to attract
and I'll speak
construction partners that can build within that envelope, but some of the stuff that we saw as well. I mean, with Terra Housing as an example, that project was approved on the back of a napkin, but we've had other projects like Delbrook that were pretty much fully designed, and BC Housing said no. And so it's a big question mark. I mean, Terra Housing was approved when it was just an idea, and then it took 3 iterations because the first design was rejected for the project to actually come to pass. That was a fully supported, BC Housing supported project, and it still took 8 years with no permitting delays on the part of the municipality. We didn't delay it. It just
We need to,
Or rejected.
It's a key point that we actually prioritize all the social and supportive housing projects over private projects.
Yeah.
In terms of staff timing.
Rejected by BC Housing.
Yeah, it wasn't us. But I think it's important to explain some of these examples and some of the challenges that we've had over the years. I mean, for the first part of the OCP, when it was adopted, the priority was market. That was the priority of the councils of the day. They were directing that it go to market, and we were displacing. And we were displacing because we were going to get something extra to replace the displaced. But it didn't happen that way. You know, it never does, right? The best laid plans of mice and men. So I think it would be very helpful to, you know, have one of those other sessions that we need to talk about some of these examples and some of the scenarios and some of the issues that we've had over the years, because there's this perception and it's not necessarily reality.
Just wanted to mention a couple of few statistics that also might be really important drawing out of this. So you'll notice the vast majority of the units, add up these four in the key growth centers over the total number of units. That is 83% of the units councils approved net have gone into those four key growth centers. Okay, the target in the OCP was 75 to 90% in that range. So we're hitting that target in terms of focusing the new growth where it can be in a connected community center. Okay, compact and connected center. Another is that this total of market units, so market ownership units, that's a 16% increase from 2011 when it was adopted. Okay, in terms of market rental, that's a 100% increase. So 1,200, we only had just over 1,200 units of market rental in this community in 2011. Not that much. So that's been doubled by council's decisions in the last 2 years.
And there was a 17-year period where not a single purpose-built rental was produced and
almost nothing in 30 actually.
Largely because of the tax implications.
And also just market conditions. There were a lot of actually investors that got into the market game in the last 5 years. So another is the increase in subsidized rental. So that which is a government is subsidizing the rent and driving it down to low to moderate income. That has also increased by 100% from what we saw in 2011. And then finally, care units. So providing care for seniors or those folks with disabilities, those have increased by close to 30%. Okay, over those 10 years. So significant changes in certain areas for sure.
100% on top of the actual numbers.
Yeah, sorry.
So if you started.
All I did was take added the care together.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I looked at how many care beds were in place in the community, and that's in the housing continuum, which we can provide councils online. And it's how many of each of those types we already had in place in 2011. So that's where I'm getting that 30% increase from.
And again, I'm here to say 30% increase with those kind of low numbers is actually not a significant number. And we still need many, many more care beds.
And I think the policy direction we do have from council now, and I'm hearing it very strongly from this council going forward, is a key focus on care, supportive and social housing will be very important in order for us to achieve success. We're hearing that very loud and clear.
Now, can I just add one more thing? When we go and have this next workshop, I think it's really important to have a discussion going forward in regards to, it's not one size fits all, and not all communities deal with development in the same way. And not because we don't have the same general processes, but because our geography is different. So when you're building a 27-story tower on Lonsdale at 15th, and you're building a 27-story tower on Mountain Highway at Sealand, I'm not going to hit you. I'm skilled in doing this and never bonking anyone. Is quite different. So we've got a floodplain, we've got creeks, we've got a lot of water, we've got access issues. Like it's a different kind of approach, right? And we've got things that other municipalities or even just building in Lynn Valley is different than building down on Mountain Highway on a floodplain, and what is required by the developers to be able to contain a floodplain and provide resilience in an area subject, which will be subject of flooding potentially.
The other issue being that you kind of have to look at the North Shore as a whole as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you say, you know, that the city is flipped around the other direction in terms of producing more single and studios, and we're producing a higher ratio of 2s and 3s, when you actually look at it all together, it's right in line with what the
One
growth
happy
should be.
municipality.
And
I'm not gonna say that A word. We don't say it in this room. It's a rule. Did they not tell you?
Oh, I must have missed that email.
Excellent point. And coordinated planning is very important. I meet with my colleagues and counterparts across the North Shore, including the Indigenous communities on a regular basis about housing. And I do know that they have many also applications in. And I'll mention that a bit more on the next slide. If we can go back 2 slides, just I'll finish up on the highlights really quickly. That's perfect. Thank you. Council made some insignificant strides around the Rental, Social and Affordable Housing Task Force, so seeking input from community members who produced an interim report. Staff then reported out on achieving that. So we have some really good input and direction from the community on how we can go about doing this, how we can achieve this necessary housing. A key update was done to the tenant relocation assistance policy. So this is if property has reached the end of its economic life and council has agreed that it could be redeveloped. We have significantly higher contributions to assist tenants who are being displaced than what the province requires as a minimum through their act, okay, in terms of notice, in terms of money and so on. And so that was a significant update to that piece of work directed by the previous council.
But we have to, I think we have to look at that again, because what's changed is the rental prices. And so if a developer is coming in and they are renting an existing property, often they don't want the properties to stay. They apply for demolition permit right away. They don't want to deal with any renters. But we have had areas that have single family homes and they rent them out at a very reduced rate. And then when it comes to moving that person out, they are required to find them a unit within 10% of that rental rate. But they don't exist because the rental rates in actuality are double that, right? So at the beginning, you may feel like, oh, I'm getting a deal. I can live here for a year, right? While we're waiting for the demolition permit and it's all great. And then when you get to the day where you got to go find a place and they're like, oh, well, we only have to find you something 10% within the price we're already giving to you. It's not good. So it's, you know, those kind of deals don't work for the resident.
We need better protections.
Absolutely. It's not enough money. It is absolutely not enough money, and we shouldn't, we really have to look at it and review it.
And all these things are balanced because at the same time, I wouldn't want the developers charging market rates for those units, right, during that year. That wouldn't be effective for our long-term needs either. So there's a balance there for sure. Housing needs report, I mentioned that earlier, so I won't go over it again. A really key question though, because it was in Premier-elect EB's statement about housing platform, to use that as a tool going forward to measure how communities are achieving their end objectives. So we, as a council will recall, we said we would come back when all the census information was published from 2021, and then we were looking to update that report and coming back to council with better information.
And that census info is going to be a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, it's been coming out in pieces.
Very interesting.
The one thing we have heard is highly likely that there's going to be a stick and carrot approach by the government in terms of whether you get grants or not. Your housing needs report. So
well, it's forcing municipalities to be more accountable for their decisions on housing, which isn't a bad thing.
But again, the driver of that is not the municipalities. The driver of that is the federal government policy.
I think that's really open to debate.
Well, no,
I don't think we have time for it tonight.
There's 500,000 people coming into the country through immigration this year. Hands down, that is the largest source of growth. We're only growing biologically by a fraction of a percent. And so it is federal policy that is putting the downward pressure on urban areas. And there's
the conservative government actually that did away with funding housing co-ops, and that's why we're in the state that we're in.
I think that there was the 17-year period where we didn't have a single purpose-built rental period in in the district was almost entirely federally liberal, but
Part of the problem as well.
all of the parties have not addressed the fact that national policies affect the download and demand for housing in communities. And there's almost no money coming from the federal government to support building housing in communities. If they were putting $50,000 a door, $100,000 a door, matching BC housing projects, then they would actually be responding to the growth that they're driving. But
And I think we also have to talk about too, you knew this part, did you get 10 minutes? Everybody else got 5, you got 10?
Well, David, 6 years ago, we had 17 meetings on this topic. So.
But we should also know, we also should know what has been downloaded to municipalities over the last 20 years from senior levels of government. I think that plays into it as far as what our costs are, what we're having to deal with costs. And you know, Andy could talk for days on this, the downloading and what's changed, because it's changed, the landscape has changed dramatically over the last 25 years. So that would be a good part for one of those more fulsome discussions.
I think the key thing is for government policy at this point, they don't need to push market ownership housing. The market will take care of that. Where we need the support and the help is in the social and the affordable rental.
they will, because they know that's how you balance the provincial budget, is on the back of construction. And so they're all going to try and outdo each other on construction because it's really good for provincial coffers, but it doesn't necessarily produce the housing that you need in your community. Anyway, good. I'm really glad that we took a stretch before you got up.
Yeah, good.
You got the energy.
We're going forward.
You're last, aren't you? Oh, no, fire, quickly, fire, come on.
I'm going to try to wrap up quickly, but just mentioning Coach House Policy Council did do a sort of a midterm update in 2019 to Coach House Policy. We do anticipate that needed to come back for further updates. So on to the next slide. This is going forward. There we are, work plan. Absolutely a focus on the town center development, complete, compact, and connected centers. That is a key focus of the work we do. That includes, of course, ensuring that we have in the future rapid and frequent transit, not just to North Shore, but across the centers through the corridors. The key amenities and services like parks, commercial space to meet those needs. Another key one, which we'll see more of in the future likely, is strategic acquisitions. So acquisitions of lands, such as was recently published, 1801 Capilano, in order to fill gaps in housing affordability in centers where we, as you see from the slide, we don't have a lot of supportive and social housing in certain of our centers. And so strategic acquisitions and development will be key going forward, I believe. Next is development cost review. So development cost charges and community amenity contributions. We've been doing lots of research in the background, and we will be coming back to council with some comprehensive recommendations on how to address that going forward. Again, that will have to be balanced with whatever the province comes up with, because we have heard whisperings and there are recommendations in provincial reports to eliminate community amenity contributions and to instead potentially create a super DCC where we could charge DCCs for various civic infrastructure. That would be very helpful. Actually, I would certainly support that if the province changed the rules for development cost charges. Next is, I mentioned social and supportive housing here in particular because council adopted a BC Housing Memorandum of Understanding in 2018. We've worked our way through most of the projects that are on that list. And so it's time to come back, and we've actually already, with council direction, initiated public conversations around other key district lands. And then we've got to add 1801 Capilano to that mix as well, and come back to council and seek direction. What are the highest priorities? Which properties would we like to see developed for what purpose? And having a new BC Housing MOU would be really, really helpful between now and September. Why? Because their last community services fund, the fund that funded Kiwanis, the same fund that funded Sanford and Delbrook, that same fund is going to be announced for the fall, and we're going to have to get ready for that with zoned properties in play. So we'll be coming back to council in Q1 of 2023 for seeking advice on that. Other couple key ones is development process review, so continuing to improve our efficiency of permit approvals, and the zoning bylaw update. If anybody has seen it, it is about 8 inches thick. It's from 1965. And I'm challenging our staff to work with the community and council on updating that very geriatric document. So it's going to be a big piece of work, at least a couple of years worth of work. Next, infill housing strategy. Previous council initiated this work. This again will be informed by Mr. Eby's plan, but key questions around multiple units, around short-term rentals, around secondary suites, lots of key questions around infill housing in our community that needs to be discussed.
Just how do we anticipate that infill housing strategy coming back to council? What would be the next step in that process?
Yeah, so we did some outreach in the fall,
Yeah.
and so we'll be coming back with, of course, the summary reports and some recommendations on how to respond. I'm a little bit hesitant to provide a response until I see what the province, and they've said they're going to do it. I want to see what the province is going to do, and for everybody's knowledge, there was a statement that in urban areas in the province, Mr. Eby's plan says that all single-family homes would allow 3 units in the same building envelope. Okay. So UBCM has reviewed this and said that's very challenging for many communities in BC to do that from a servicing perspective and so on. So there's clearly some conversations that need to occur there. But I wouldn't want to have a complete community conversation about infill and then have the province download some objective and then it just mixes the pot. So we will have to be nimble in response to
It might be something as simple as saying if you have a single family home, given the circumstances, you could have a coach house.
And soy and
The
business.
city already does, right?
Yeah, it should.
It may be up to the municipalities to define urban and, or, because it's unlikely he's going to define his own neighborhood as urban. So but if you look at the District of North Vancouver's densities relative to the province of BC, we look fairly urban. If you're just looking amongst Metro Vancouver, we don't look very urban. So it depends on really what lens they're looking for.
Right, as we'll hear back. Very quickly, then I'll wrap up the last few things. Climate action, natural hazards, and environment. And I won't go over it because Caroline covered that. But our division, where we issue permits and so on, that's the one where the rubber hits the road in terms of decisions being made. So we work very closely on the development of the policy, and then we implement. We're implementers in our area. Childcare, heritage, and social supports. I mentioned that we're providing updates to council on those, especially on the social supports funding. And then economic development strategy and increased outreach. So I really look forward to Neonilla coming back and presenting to you on our objectives in that area. And it's going to be familiar to you because we're taking the direction you've already provided to council in the action plan for the OCP, and we're translating that into a work plan going forward for her. So.
We did have an economic development function some time ago. And the one thing that really worked there is we developed specific recommendations and we started to work through them. And then it got to the point where we implemented all of those and then retired. And we just think now with all the issues that we're dealing with, not just us, everybody in the North Shore, jobs and people getting to work and all that stuff is affecting our ability to actually have people working on the North Shore.
Yeah. And we are really looking forward to working with all of you on implementing your policies, programs, and initiatives in an effective way going forward, and including these.
I'm sure that all of us saw the email that came in from Kelly Pond, and I quite concurred with her that this type of information on the housing needs and can we do that on a quarterly basis instead of an annual? And I mean, things are changing so fast, so quickly, and I just think it would be better on quarterly. I think that was an excellent suggestion by her.
Yeah, and so actually we publish real time all building permits issued, and that's available on our website now and has been for some time. And we also have the last 30 days, we have summaries as well as sections on major projects going through. So there's a bit of information. I think what she's looking at is some communities do have standard tables and just get automatically updated. So we're actually working with our IT team on doing that because our EnerGov program, which tracks the permits, we want to actually, I don't want to have staff manually retyping. That doesn't make any sense. So we want it to be automated and we want it to be consistently provided and not just in housing. But of course, we're looking at a dashboard for how we're achieving all of our corporate objectives. And so I think it's a piece of the puzzle, but an important one for sure.
What's the timeline on that? I know it's.
I have to look over.
There's a lot of work happening on how best to source the information, which is how best to display it. But we're going to be making strides on the public side of things on community.org next year, 2023.
So, yeah, that's the website conversation that we're still gonna have. Where is she? We're having that conversation. I had to try to find something on the development page one time, and I went into the previous communications director and I said, I need to be able to know how I can find large developments. And so she you know, our communications director at the time started to show me, and then they said, hold on, we're gonna get somebody to drive this. We'll find it. And it was like 27 clicks. And I'm like, okay, right there, we've got a bit of an issue if it's 27 clicks. It needs to be 2 clicks, right, to get to where we want to go. But on this, and you know, your enthusiasm and your energy, well, no, it's not. But you know, it was a good show. And but I have to say, I need to understand, I'm looking at Nicola and I'm looking at Mr. Cohen, and council really needs to understand this discussion about where we are and prioritizing what we need to do going forward. We really need to do that. And it's all well and good that we want to check off all of these things, and I'm sure there's 100 more things that planning would like to do. But we've got somebody building a house right now, and we're trying to paint it and decorate it, and we haven't put the roof on yet. And we've got, you know, every time we put up our hands for a new application or another development or something, or a new project, another bridge or a culvert, it is the hands going up here upstairs and then everybody downstairs trying to pull it off. And I think we're right now a little bit in over our head with a lot of stuff. So it's great that we want to try to address all these things, but what do we, and I'm hearing Doug McKay Dunn in my head right now. What do we have to do? What is it? Have to do, nice to do, and must do. What do we have to do to get through this? What is something we want to do, and what are, you know, we have to prioritize this. I don't know how we can keep, and you said at the end of your presentations, you were interested in hearing about what our initiatives are. But every time council makes a decision on something, there's a whole nother group of departments that actually have to pull it off. And I am hearing, and I am concerned about us not being able to manage what's already on our plate. And we do not have those, and that's why I thanked you for your comments, Mr. Chevalier, because it's hard for the departments to say, we can't get there right now. But we have to have an honest conversation about where we are, what we need to complete, and where we're going in the midst of all of this stuff that we're facing: recession, more interest rates, supply chains, being able to manage this work with limited number of people working. So I think we just have to, we just have to find that middle ground, that plane that we can all be on, right? I'm very serious about this.
Talking about the deliverability of a project.
Absolutely, and understand.
I'm watching the time. I still have another presentation, so thank you very much, Mr. Milburn. Generated the most discussion so far. Well done. That's the gold star, right?
That was to be expected, though, isn't it?
I just wanted to say was my whole purpose in saying that we need to be looking at the operating and the capital budgets, and whatever we're already planned to start, maybe not this year, but next year. We need to look at what we're re-look at what our desires are, and then reprioritize them. Maybe something that was thought of in the last council doesn't move forward now. Things have changed.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the question is, where does that originate? Does it originate with council going and reassessing every single one of the priorities that's been set? Or is it more efficient to have staff come back and say, look, the easiest way to solve my workflow problem is to recommend that we punt this one out to 2024.
I'm just not used to saying that.
Okay with that? And I think it's easiest to have that originate with staff, rather than having us go back through every single item in the work plan that we put forward. Because I think when Gavin have 230 projects that he's got on the go.
He's rested now. He'll be able to address them.
It's best to have it come back from staff. They have intimate knowledge of the projects. They have intimate knowledge of the deliverability of the project, because just because it's got a dollar figure attached to it, they're all different. Some of them can be delivered easily with the resources that we have, and other ones are real problematic. It's best to have that come back from
and then have discussion going forward.
I agree with that, but also in what I'm talking about is not just hunting things out to a better time. I'm also talking about whether we still tackle this.
Right.
Yeah. We've been having lots of those conversations, and you'll be getting some very honest feedback.
Good. That's honesty is the best.
We realize we cannot, given the state of the nation right now. do everything that we're committed to do without making some priorities. And whether it's timing or just saying, no, we're not gonna do that this term.
I'd like to say that the fire department's the fanciest so far. Well done, really fancy. Shy, yeah. I know he's in uniform. I know.
At that time, Rich,
Really good.
we're scheduled till 11. We don't normally go past 10 on these.
Staying till 11. We're not staying till 11. Don't worry.
Make
Don't.
sure you have lots of time.
I'll try and skim through some of this stuff.
It should be unanimous, doesn't it?
So I left a copy of our latest annual report. It's not something that I need you to follow along with for today. It's just something for your own information, something we're very proud of, and it really details a lot of things that we're involved in, not just. So Brian's away, and I am happy to provide few highlights, the elements that make the district fire department a leader, not only regionally, but provincially and nationally in areas such as technical rescue, fire behavior science, wildfire readiness and response, and accreditation. So next slide, please. So when we look at our responsibilities as a department, it all centers around the protection of life, property, and the environment. And obviously, fire suppression would stand out as one of those leading areas. In the background is the upkeep and the maintenance of our fire stations and our training center, our apparatus, the health and safety of our personnel, and the equipment and the personal protective clothing that they wear, as well as the fire behavior science-based training programs that we have in place in order to maintain our high level of service. Within not too far.
Let's go back to slide, yeah.
Thank you. Within technical rescue, we're one of the leaders in the fire service when it comes to the number of rescues that we actually attend annually. We respond typically to about over 100 rescues a year, and it's generally related to outdoor recreation within the district. And that's your bikers, kayakers, runners, hikers, you name it, anyone who's enjoying the district and get themselves in trouble, they're gonna call us first.
That includes cliff jumpers. Forgot that.
Well, and luckily we have a very engaged and experienced instructor group that makes sure that we maintain our proficiencies in all of our rescue types, which could be swift water, flood rescue, high angle, steep slope, trail rescue, and motor vehicles. Within fire-based EMS, we've been transitioning to an EMR level through both enhanced training and attrition, where we see a lot of our recruits already coming in with a higher level of medical training. Moving ahead with this just enables us to provide that higher level of service to the community, along with adding some additional modalities to our license, such as pain relief, which is Entonox, which you might know as laughing gas, blood pressure cuffs and pulse oximeter machines, use of naloxone for overdose incidents, and then the Lucas machines, which are machine-assisted CPR, which are very handy for us in a rescue environment. Within fire prevention, that should be fire inspection, investigation, prevention, and education, because they all wear many hats within our public safety group. But our key responsibility is to annually inspect our businesses and industry and ensure compliance. In the event of fires, our investigators are on scene to investigate and provide detailed information to the fire commissioner's office. And with that information and data, we use that to develop and target our prevention programs, the community risk assessments, and our educational material that we deliver in our schools, our open houses, and our community outreach events. And lastly, with a major emergency operations plan, we have a tri-municipal plan that was designed back in 2016, and it was really meant to just bring the three departments together and give them a framework to follow like a playbook in a sense for us to respond to major emergencies. It really provides a guideline for standardized operational procedures in the event of major natural incidents, and is reviewed and exercised annually to keep up our familiarity with it. Next slide, please. So our mission, vision, and values are unique to our fire department ourselves, but they're very aligned with core values that you saw recently in terms of the DNB as a whole. These were developed in a process back in 2018, followed by the development of our 5-year strategic plan, and it really set the foundation for us to pursue our accreditation process.
And then one of the themes that we see when you look at our mission, vision, and values is that it's really about providing excellent service to our community. And we keep that in the back of our mind when we're making all our decisions. Next. I know you guys can't see these because they're not, sorry, Lisa.
Oh, no.
Nothing to do with this one. Don't want to see the one I was going to actually include.
Minimum font regulation.
Yeah, no, I've written that was my first thing on my list. Font, Andrew.
Overview of our resource deployment model. We have 5 strategically located fire halls. We have a training center, about 140 people across all divisions within a fire department, and an annual operating budget of $22 million. So our Lynn Valley Station, which is our main station right now, is a multi-apparatus station. It has an engine that's staffed with 4 members and a rescue tower that is cross-staffed with 3, and then a squad. And our squads are really a resource that we use in terms of a response that would go along with a fire truck or in place of a fire truck, depending on the incident and the incident type. So Linmore Station 2 is soon going to be Maplewood Fire Rescue Center, and it's going to move from a single engine apparatus bay to a 3 engine response, when we move our tower and our rescue down from Lynn Valley. Then our Mont Royal Station 3, Deep Cove Station 4, and the Norgate Station 5 all have an engine and a squad associated with them. And then obviously our training center is on St. Denis.
Maybe if I could just interject, one thing you talked about, sort of mobile units. What we've been talking about, Brian and I and the staff have been talking about, is there's a committee I've been serving on that is looking at changing the relationship between emergency health services, ambulance services, and fire services. There may be a way to restructure fire services so that we can provide a better service within the resources that we've got, provided we get the license approval from EHS, and do things like data sharing and that kind of thing. That's well along the way. There's already a draft report that's going to go to the minister, and I'm pretty confident that we're going to get the green light move this up forward throughout the whole process.
Good.
Become more of a shared service.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll demarc what we do. I mean, because there's a whole bunch of background stuff that has to go into it, such as what are the training levels, what are the certification levels, you know, how are you configured, how do you share data so you can actually know that you're getting the kind of results that you want to, so all that's kind of in the mix. I've been working on this for 2 years now, and we're getting really close to the final report.
It really gives us a lot of flexibility in how we determine how we want to deploy our resources and what that looks like. It could look really different from what we do right now.
Yeah, the EHS model is being, they decide what you're going to do, one size fits all. And we know right now, as you go through our province, the rural and suburban and urban demands and needs are very, very different.
Yeah. Quickly, just our organizational structure. We have a fire chief who has overall responsibility for our department, a deputy chief who does both strategic support as well as oversees 4 operational ACs. Each of those ACs has responsibility for one of our platoons, as well as some portfolios and different jobs that are off the side of their desk. I also have responsibility to oversee our public safety and our training AC, and then as well as a technology and information lieutenant. And then we have 121 suppression people across those 4 platoons. We have 7 public safety personnel and then 4 administration staff. Next. Well, some of our projects, one I mentioned was accreditation. We started in 2018 to do this multi-year process to be accredited through the Commission on Fire Service Accreditation. This is really a process where departments undergo a really thorough self-assessment, looking at all the strengths and weaknesses of everything that you do. And then you use that information to continuously improve. So it took us over about 2 years to compile all the information and adopt all the processes that we need to in order to pass our site visit, which we had early in January this year. And then we finally went in front of the board in March and it defended our application and we're successful. So we've been accredited since March, which is really.
How many others are accredited in Canada?
So there's 9 in Canada. We're the first in BC for a career department. There's about 300 internationally that are accredited and probably another 300 that are in the process of actually going through and getting their accreditation. So it's starting to, it's not very well known here yet, but it will be. So I guess we're.
Pioneers for sure on it. That's good.
In terms of the cooperative fire service, or we refer to as shared service, this is started back in 2009 when we brought the 3 departments together to support a better and more effective and efficient utilization of our resources. We really started out as 3 independent and siloed departments, and over the last 12 years, we've leveraged the strengths and specialties of all the different departments in an effort to kind of erase the municipal boundaries in terms of our emergency response on the North Shore. Wildland, we're nearing the end of our 4-year plan to enhance the resource capability of not just the district fire department, but the DNV as a whole in terms of the impacts of wildfire. So with that plan, we've added capacity to our sprinkler protection units, which are trailers that have sprinklers, hoses, all the tools that you need to, I think you can protect up to about 50 houses per trailer, and we have 3 trailers. And basically it takes low manpower to take one of these, deploy it to an area, set up all our sprinklers and walk away, and it actually protects that area from any type of wildfire that is maybe coming in and impinging through the interface.
How many of those do we want?
I don't think we need more than 3
Okay.
for us.
Never asked the fire department.
Well, I know. I mean, the finance.
Blank
guys
check
are there.
Just wait, there's more.
Just let me know.
So we're adding a water tender, which gives us capacity to deliver water where we might have no water, inadequate water on the North Shore. We've added 3 of our wildland response units, which are partly we describe as squads, but they have wildland capabilities. And that really gives us the ability to get to interface areas that we really can't drive a fire truck to. And then lastly, we've added 2 hydro subs, and you can kind of think of these as portable hydrants. And they're almost the opposite of the water tender. They're going to areas that have water. It just might not necessarily be coming out of a hydrant. We can use them as a portable hydrant and supply water, whether or not it's for firefighting or into our apparatus, and we can run lines off of that.
Including seawater.
Including seawater. We just got to flush them out when we're done. Community partnerships, we're always looking to build our resiliency in our relationships. For instance, we regularly train with NTF1, which is the heavy urban search and rescue. And we bring a lot of that experience back with our members that are training with them, and then we're putting that back into our own internal program. And we're starting to set up our own light, maybe medium urban search and rescue capabilities on the North Shore. We have a 35-member extended operation unit consisting of personnel from the DNV operations yard who have stepped up to support us as a resource in the case of an emergency. And then we regularly train with agencies such as North Shore Rescue, Royal Canadian Marine Search and Rescue, Metro Vancouver, Grouse Mountain, BC Wildfire, etc. Within the fireboat agreement, we used to have our own fireboat, and we were part of the consortium, and we've now moved away from that model to contracting out for service from Vancouver Fire and Rescue, who have 2 new beautiful boats, and they'll be the ones who would supply us any type of water-based firefighting.
You want a boat, don't you?
No.
I'd say I did enjoy being one of the drivers of our fireboat.
Yeah, but the problem was the boats would get maybe 2 to 3 calls a year. The amount of maintenance and training that it took to keep a crew, specific crew, with 2 to 3 calls a year, that's just not efficient.
A lot of finances into those boats. So happy Vancouver can do that for us. And then obviously, Nicola and Peter touched on Maplewood Fire and Rescue Center, which is really quite near and dear to my heart. It's been since 2009 that we've been trying to get this facility that's going to be the perfect spot for us to consolidate those functions. And yeah, there's a really good, within our webpage on dnv.org, there's a lot of information and great stuff in terms of all the effective add-ons and the things that that's going to get to us in the future. And hoping to be occupying that early 2024, I think.
Maybe I could just comment a little bit on the cooperative fire services. We actually have an agreement that we drafted that tells us how we work together. And it's the absolute envy of other fire departments in the province. would say. In fact, it's quite unique.
We're at the forefront.
Yeah.
of that.
Everyone's example of collaboration across the North Shore, and I use it all the time because it works so well, right? And you do it in so many different areas.
Councillor Ma, it's the closest we can get to the A word in terms of fire department.
Yeah, it is.
Recruitment, all right, you recruit as jointly.
I could just recall
Stuff together.
Just recall one incident where we had, or one day, where we had 3 calls all at once. And as it turned out, because of the closest units, you had West Vancouver in North Van District, North Van District, West Vancouver in the city, and in the district. I mean, it was just, nobody was where you would normally have it. We'd stuck to an old model. Right, people.
Move Up module had it as seamless as can be, plus also the interagency training that goes on meant they can all work together seamlessly, and so huge difference from where we were 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's evolved so much over the years to a place where we are really leaders. And you have a lineup of people wanting to come and work for the fire department. They do not have a problem with retaining firefighters or getting people interested in working for the department. And it's one of the most challenging departments to actually be hired in as well. It is that high level that you want to get to, but it's a challenge to get there.
That's why they get headhunted by the other.
Because they're so well trained.
Metro Vancouver's using our agreement, because they have to have a wildfire agreement for Metro Vancouver run properties, and I know they specifically identified the agreement on the North Shore as being the model for how they want to partner with municipalities, between Metro and municipalities.
As well as the relationship that you have built with Coastal Rescue being, a very, obvious, well-known rescue team, but how you guys have come together and you are there supporting each other, and that certainly evolved over the years too. And it wasn't always like that, no, but it is now, and it is the envy of other teams and other municipalities across the province.
I'll just move on to the last slide. And just some issues and challenges to bring up. Obviously, it's not just us in the fire department, but we are seeing a lot of significant cost increase in terms of the cost of both our apparatus and our equipment. I don't think that anyone else is immune to that. Along with that, some of the supply chain issues that we're seeing, even when we can order these things, we're getting wait times of up to 4 to 6 months in some cases, and it's really hard to really plan out and try and do your business when your equipment that you ordered is 6 to 8 months away, and it's a little bit frustrating. In terms of recruitment and retention, as much as we are a very desirable place, we have seen that we've been losing some of our members to other departments, and that potentially could be for a multitude of reasons, cost of living, and and then retention piece. We've lost a few of our command staff to other departments as well, and they've gone on to different organizations where they're enhancing their development and their careers. Bargaining trends within fire, there's a lot of pressure from provincial to move towards a 24-hour shift pattern. We're not there yet. We moved through our bargaining last time and actually put it towards a committee so we can investigate it, to really look at the impacts of what that 24-hour shift pattern might have on us. But it's on its way. It's in the east and it's coming to the west.
The city has adopted it, right?
The city has a pilot.
Still piloting.
But we're seeing with Canada is there's a lot of political pressure by the IFF to get these implemented. And if you talk to any of the fire chiefs, they say they don't want them unless they're responding to that kind of political pressure. But we're starting to see that that's a trend, and we're just going to have to make sure that we have a good understanding as to what the impact is on the service.
So 24-hour is so just explain the difference between what we've got now and what that looks like.
Yeah, there's different versions of what the 24-hour pattern would be, but essentially is right now we work 2 day shifts and 2 night shifts, 10s and 14s. And what they would do is they stack those to a 24-hour period, some form of a break, another 24-hour period, and then additional time before they would start that cycle again. So you're at work for 24 consecutive hours.
And the advantages and disadvantages, obviously the amount of time that you're at work and the advantages. Are there any?
And those are the things that we're asking them to come to us and tell us what those advantages are going to be. Because when we look at it, scheduling and operationally, it's hard to see a lot of those pieces that they come out and say, well, it's morale and it's all these things, but show me why.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at right now. We're just investigating it, hoping to see what other departments, larger departments are going to do, and maybe they come up with better information for us to follow, but we'll try and work with them to see what best fits us.
How long has the city been piloting for?
A year and a half,
Oh,
beginning of the pandemic.
I thought we used to have something like that and we went away from it. And when you have something like it when you have volunteer firefighters, basically you have a mixed unit where you have people who are being paid to sleep and stay over at the hall on
departments.
Yeah. I thought we were going away from that, where we were going.
Don't do that.
Yeah. I know, but a generation ago, it was a lot more common and people were going away from it. Now it seems like they'd be going back to it.
So, from our perspective, we have a whole bunch of people lining up to be firefighters. That's not a particular issue. So it's really the sort of the work, quality of work and the attractiveness for the firefighters. But we have seen in some of the departments, whether it's back east, down south, or wherever, that the overtime costs increase quite dramatically. Because if instead of having somebody off for 1 10-hour shift, you now got them off for a full 24-hour shift. That means you have to start building into your organization the capacity to respond to that. And so those are all the questions we're going to have to ask before we get into it, because you don't want to come up with a surprise and all of a sudden find, well, I have a lot of, with the greatest respect, happy firefighters, and we've got another $3 or $4 million cost hit.
So it's not quite accurate to say people are lining up to work at the fire department when you have so few women and people from diverse communities in those positions. And I noticed that you've made all these attempts to try and get more young women interested in such. But why do you think, I can't imagine what a massive barrier working 24 hours would be to a woman, especially a woman with young children. But what do you think what is the reason why you can't seem to recruit anybody but men?
We've been trying, like you see, and there's so many different ways to try and connect and promote fire service to women and diverse candidates. I think a big piece of it is that they're just not interested in the career of firefighting, in the sense of they're more professionally inclined to go after professions other than, and I guess in a sense, we might not do ourselves favors because we're quite vocal right now in terms of the health implications of being a firefighter, all the things that it requires. Something I'm going to touch on in terms of health and wellness and resiliency is that we're seeing a lot of long-term absences now because of mental illness and injury.
PTSD and
right. So when that's out there and people are seeing that, they're making the decision themselves to whether or not they want to pursue that career or not.
Right.
So and that's not just for women, that's for a lot of people. And we're seeing a decrease in the amount of people that we're getting applying now compared to 10 years ago. We were getting hundreds and hundreds of applications. Now maybe we're only getting a few hundred. So that's a little bit of a concern for us as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then the last piece is just technology and data, which is a kind of a nicer feel-good piece where it's gaining a lot of momentum in the fire service. And it's things like use of biometrics, robotics, artificial intelligence and virtual reality, smart technology, and predictive analytics is something that we're using right now as predictive analytics in terms of trying to assess what our risk identification is on the North Shore. And we're in partnership with a company called Opta, which is a side piece from Fire Underwriters. And they have this software where it's really quite accurate in terms of using a lot of demographics, our fire history, our response history, and they're really got predictive ability to say where you should target and focus a lot of our attention in terms of our fire prevention and our risk assessment. So,
yeah, the goal is to go, particularly with inspections, with changes to the Fire Safety Act, is to go to an inspection frequency that really mirrors the risk, as opposed to what we've traditionally been able to do.
Usually based on occupancy, and that's not always necessarily where your risk is.
So you're seeing places like Surrey. I know when Garris was there, actually looking at a history on a particular property and saying, you know, if we've done inspections every year for the last 10 years and you've never had anything wrong, why are we inspecting you? And you're seeing places like England, for example, where there's a certain self-reporting that goes into it for those that have a really good record. So those are the kinds of ways you have to continue to change the fire service.
Really good.
Anything else, question-wise?
Thank you.
You're always welcome to come for a tour. The doors are open.
And you can ring the bell in the fire truck if you want.
On the sirens.
So maybe I can close by mentioning that, particularly for the new council members, as I say, the agencies are going to try to set up something with you specifically. But maybe there's an opportunity, and I'll just give you some time to think about this, but maybe there are some highlights we can do in terms of a tour. You know, spending a half a day or a Saturday, something, just getting out to see all the different assets and the services.
All of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of us.
Put Councillor Murray in the gear, put her through Fire Ops 101. Is that?
I am not quite ready. I haven't done it and I want to. I know. I'm gonna do it.
Probably.
That was great.
But the last time we were gonna have it, I went to Dave and I'm like, I'm a little bit scared about going into that confined space. Dave's like, oh my God, I wouldn't go in there. I'm like, oh. And then I chickened out. But I want the hat. I want the hat. So I'm gonna do it.
We might need to do a brewery tour.
Well, we can do a tour and then go to a brewery at lunch. How about that? Yeah.
I don't think I want to mix up the two.
Well, we can go have a lunch.
We actually, you know, quite legitimately, we've talked about potential for some tours.
Yeah, tour and a lunch and a visit.
Building additions
Yeah.
for recreation facilities, to look at different major projects that we've had, you know, like perhaps the treatment we had to do on McKay Creek, I think would really open your eyes to what we have to do from an engineering standard to mitigate the effects of climate change with our rain patterns, because the amount of money it's going to divert from our engineering budget is going to be scary. So doing those kinds of tours, I think actually would be a great idea. Councillor Murray, you and I were chatting about it. You know, Metro used to have the magical mystery tour where they basically would put everybody on the bus and you would go around to several locations to learn about the organization as you went. And perhaps that's timely. We couldn't do those kinds of things during COVID, and so I'll work with staff to see sort that out.
That was a good session. Really good.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you,
Any
Dave.
other questions about tonight or the next, anything? Okay, thank you all so much. We've completed the business of this evening's meetings. I'll accept adjournment if somebody moves it. Moved by Councillor Forbes, accepted. Thank you all so much. To the members of the public that joined us this evening, thank you so much for participating. Unfortunately, we did not have enough time left to do any public questions or comment, but we will take care of that at our next regular meeting of council. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Sure.